Spider-Man.
Oh, no way! All of us are.
Universes are set to collide in the sequel to one of the best animated superhero movies out there, Spider-Man Across the Spiderverse. With all these different Spider-Men, Spider-Women, and even a few civilians and villains here and there, let's see who shines as a true hero. I'm Kyle with Wicked Binge, and this is Spider-Man Across the Spiderverse characters, good to evil. Now, major spoilers ahead for both Spider-Verse movies. With that said, let's start with our most noble character and work our way down to the most evil. These characters are the good. For our gold medal of good, we have to give it to Pavitra Papakar, aka Spider-Man India. He's an Indian version of Spider-Man from an alternate universe fusion of Mumbai and Manhattan, although he's only in the movie for a short amount of time, being the most inexperienced Spider-Man at only 6 months. He's already proven himself to be a good hero. He works together well with the other Spider-Men that have visited his universe, and just comes off as very friendly and positive in general, due to the fact that he hasn't had many tragic moments in his life as Spider-Man yet. We also see how well he works on his own, successfully saving an entire bus from falling off a bridge. Though he may not be the Spider-Man we spend the most time with, his lack of any lapses in morality or questionable decisions more than earn him the gold medal of good. Easily taking our silver medal of good, however, is the film's main focus, Miles Morales. While he's gotten a bit more mature and has gotten plenty of experience as Spider-Man since the first film, Miles is still very much a teenager and as such can be very rebellious. This usually involves sneaking around and lying, though the latter is primarily due to his secret identity. We should also point out that while we can understand why he fights back against them, Miles is still willing to potentially put the entire Spider-Verse at risk to save his father. It's up to the audience whether he's being a true hero who's unwilling to sacrifice anyone for the sake of satisfying some higher power, or if he's simply taking a careless and selfish risk. But if you ask us, Miles' more heroic moments easily overshadow any moments where he leans into his more rebellious side. Even when he makes mistakes, you know that he wants to do the right thing and that he's always going to fight for the people he cares about. Moving on to our bronze medal of good, we're giving it to Miles' parents, Jefferson and Rio Morales. They may not be perfect parents, but they're pretty great ones. The movie does, admittedly, have quite a bit of drama within the Morales family, but while you may sympathize with the characters, the bickering never gets to the point of being concerning. Jefferson and Rio, while stern at times, care deeply about their son and only want him to thrive. Though she is a bit clingy at first when they start talking about college, Rio still encourages Miles to follow Gwen, all while telling him to take care of himself and reminding him how much she loves her. Jefferson, meanwhile, while still trying to be a good father, is also shown trying to actually work with Spider-Man instead of against him, which is incredibly refreshing for a superhero story. But let's step away from figures of authority and take a look at someone who's all about anti-authority. Next is Hobart Hobie Brown, aka Spider-Punk. Being a punk rock hero from an alternate universe that is ruled by a totalitarian regime, he is all about going against the flow and fighting back against the establishment. He'll even rebel in small ways almost constantly, like stealing small things in the Spider Society's lab or verbally contradicting people whenever possible. In some ways, this can make him come off as a bit hostile and antisocial, but he actually turns out to be a great ally. In addition to warning Miles about the Spider Society, we also see him help Miles escape from his imprisonment. As for Gwen, not only does he let her crash in his dimension when she needs a break, but he also makes a homemade dimension-hopping watch for her, allowing her the means to gather her team and rescue Miles. All in all, in addition to being a talented hero in his own right, he just encompasses the most admirable parts of being punk, even if in exchange he doesn't always come off as a typical hero. Moving on, let's briefly mention the Spider Society's main tech support, that being Margot Kess, aka Spider-Bite. Margot is yet another Spider-Woman who is able to be a superhero through a virtual reality avatar that she uses to help her escape from her family's arguing. Although we don't ever see her fighting off any baddies, it's Margot's tech that allows the Spider Society to send villains and anomalies back home to their original dimensions. Furthermore, when we see just how far O'Hara is willing to go for his mission, Margot decides to let Miles go home and later joins Gwen's team to help rescue him. Margot is simply a good person, and it's only her lack of screen time that causes her to fall to the lower end of our good tier. Now, someone who is perhaps a bit more complicated but is still good at heart is the film's secondary protagonist, Gwen Stacy. Despite all the drama in her life, Gwen is just a girl trying to do her best in her duties as Spider-Woman, even when it causes her to feel frustrated and alone. She's still a great hero, as we see when she fights the Vulture in the art museum. When things go wrong with her father, however, Gwen chooses to run away and join the Spider Society, fixing anomalies. This, unfortunately, causes her morals to slip a bit, as we see her lie to Miles about the Society and its mission, not quite knowing how to tell him the truth about it or his origins. But while it may take her a bit of extra time, Gwen does eventually realize her mistakes and start to fight back against O'Hara for Miles' sake. This turns into her gathering her own band to rescue him from Universe 42. And while we'll have to wait until the next film to see how this mission goes, with Gwen leading the way, we're pretty sure it'll be successful. Joining the rescue squad is our final member of the good tier, Peter B. Parker. He may have been a reluctant mentor before, but while he still may not always have all the answers or the most tact, Peter B. does still care a ton about Miles. Like Gwen, he doesn't fully reveal the truth at first, originally siding with O'Hara after believing it's how it has to be. But even as Peter B. is chasing Miles down, he's still trying to talk with him and find a way to stop Miles without hurting him. He also defends Miles against O'Hara and doesn't hesitate to join Gwen's team. The only thing we can knock him for is his choice to take his daughter, May Day, with him during missions. That just seems incredibly dangerous and irresponsible, even for a baby with spider powers. Now, before we get to the film's antagonists, let's quickly go over the characters who land somewhere in the moral gray area, not quite being a hero or a villain. First up, we have Jessica Drew, aka Spider-Woman. Within the Spider Society, we see her act as a sort of second in command to O'Hara. Being awesome and incredibly skilled in her own right, Jessica tends to be a bit more optimistic than O'Hara, as well as a bit more willing to let certain spider people, namely Gwen, into their team. But while she'll give others a chance to do great things, Jessica is no pushover. She has her own moments of being stern, and she understands the importance of preserving the Spiderverse. This results in her being on O'Hara's side for pretty much the entire film, joining him on his mission to preserve the canon. This is save for one scene, where she ultimately decides to let Gwen go on a rescue mission instead of capturing her. This shows that even she understands that O'Hara may be in the wrong, and we could easily see her fully making a turnaround within the third film. From second in commands to police captains, let's take some time to discuss Captain George Stacy, Gwen's father. Needless to say, this guy doesn't have the best first impression. He's introduced as the guy trying to hunt down and arrest Spider-Woman, and even when she reveals her identity, George is still unsure about Gwen's innocence and continues trying to arrest her. Thankfully, this seems to be a bit of a wake-up call for him, as when they meet up again, George is a bit more willing to hear his daughter out and support her role as Spider-Woman, even to the point of quitting the police force for her sake. Seeing him finally support Gwen and allow her to be a hero is just a great moment in the film, and while it can be a bit hard to forget him firing a warning shot at his own daughter, we're glad that he was able to turn things around. But you can't have a hero without villains for them to fight, so let's go over the movie's bad and evil characters. Just outside the film's bottom three, we have the Prowlers, aka Universe 42's Aaron and Miles. We only see these two briefly at the end of the film when Miles is accidentally sent to their universe, but while they only have a couple brief scenes, those scenes still manage to say a lot. We already know quite a bit about Aaron's methods as the Prowler, being willing to take out his targets by any means necessary, and given that Universe 42's universe doesn't have a Spider-Man and is seen as a much more dire and dangerous place, even if the Prowler ends up being more of a vigilante than a villain, we just can't see him being any less harsh in his methods. As for the other Miles, he immediately comes off as cold, especially when our Miles begs him for his help, seemingly not caring at all about the safety of his alternate universe dad. We won't know much more about these two until the third film, but given what we already know of them, they certainly seem like bad news. But while he may be a bit more old school than the Prowler's gadgets, the Vulture, who is getting our bronze medal of evil, still manages to be just as bombastic and dangerous. Hailing from a Renaissance-inspired universe, the first thing that this Vulture does when arriving in Gwen's dimension is attack an art museum. He doesn't seem to care much about putting civilians in danger or causing property damage, seemingly reveling in the latter and even casually tossing insults at the art itself. He's not a big character in the film, but he serves as a great mini-boss with an absolutely killer design. Our silver medal of evil is easily going to be the most divisive character in the movie, that being Miguel O'Hara, aka Spider-Man 2099. Described as a ninja vampire, O'Hara is the leader of the Spider Society society whose main goal is to protect the overall Spider-Verse, not wanting to see any more universes be destroyed under his watch. Unfortunately, this is a very heavy and very stressful goal, leading to O'Hara having quite a few anger issues, especially towards Miles. When Miles starts arguing about finding another way and rebelling against the canon, O'Hara goes all out trying to take him down, becoming enraged as well as incredibly violent and cruel at some points. While we may sympathize with his tragic backstory, the way he talks about Miles and calls him a mistake just goes way over the line. It's obvious that he's taking out his own self-hatred on Miles, but that's certainly no excuse. The same could be said about our gold medal of evil recipient, Dr. Jonathan On, aka The Spot. Once an ordinary scientist from Alchemax, the Spot not only turns to a life of crime after being given his superpowers, but he also decides to take his frustrations and trauma out on Miles. Once he discovers his true powers, Spot makes it his mission to not only become more powerful by any means necessary, but to also take away everything that Miles loves, starting with Miles' father, who Spot plans to kill. Whether he'll succeed or manage to turn over a new leaf, we'll just have to wait and see. But for right now, Spot remains as a selfish, vengeful, totally insane, and totally evil villain who needs to be stopped. With our morality spectrum complete, let's wrap things up with our center medals. Starting off slow, our sloth medal has to go to Peter B. While he isn't shown being super lazy in the film, the fact that he's constantly wearing a bathrobe over his spider suit just gives off the vibes of him perhaps not being as quick to the jump as other spider people. The greed medal, naturally, goes to the Spot. His introduction scene is him trying to rob an ATM at a local bodega, and he just gets more greedy from there. The pride medal has to go to Spider-Punk. Despite quote not being into labels, he almost constantly talks about how punk he is, taking a ton of pride in actively going against the other spider people and the establishment. The lust medal has to go to Miles for his crush on Gwen Stacy. While it's more subtle than other examples of animated crushes, moments like Miles filling up his notebook with sketches of her, having hope that a relationship between a Spider-Man and a Gwen Stacy could work out, and him briefly being just a bit jealous about her relationships with other young Spider-Men, more than earns him this medal. Finally, our wrath medal has to go to Miguel O'Hara. Although he may try to come off as simply serious, once Miles starts rebelling against him, O'Hara seems to go full rage mode, even to the point of becoming almost monster-like in his movements, and incredibly cruel with his words.
Then I looked at my uncle and...
Let me guess. He died?
While many of our favorite spider people have similar powers and abilities, each of them use their abilities in different ways. When we look at this, how exactly do they compare to not just civilians and villains, but also each other? I'm Kyle with Wicked Binge, and this is Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse characters, weak to powerful. Now, major spoilers ahead for both Spider-Verse films. As always, we'll be starting with our weakest character and working our way up to the strongest. Taking the weakest character ranking by default, we actually have two characters, Miles' parents, Jefferson and Rio Morales. Being ordinary humans, these two can't exactly compare to the other characters in terms of power level, being a regular cop and nurse respectively. With Rio specifically, she is emotionally intelligent, and as we said in our Good to Evil video on this film, she and Jefferson are both good parents. When it comes to being a cop, Jefferson seems fairly athletic and is decent at keeping up with criminals and Spider-Man, and is able to take care of himself for the most part, only occasionally needing a safe. But as we said, ordinary humans on the ground can't exactly compete with superpowered web slingers. That being said, there are a couple of humans who outrank them, such as Captain George Stacy. If you notice, George starts out as a police captain, while Jefferson may receive the title but ultimately doesn't get sworn in within this second movie, with that event being saved as the ticking clock for the third film. This means that in terms of status, George does outrank Jefferson, even if he does eventually give up his position as police captain for the sake of his daughter. As for everything else, he's about on the same level as Jefferson, being fairly physically fit and having a good amount of stamina for an ordinary human, being one of the few to escape the Vulture's attack without getting too banged up. Now it's time to move into our superpowered characters, and unfortunately that means starting off with one who's seen as a bit of a joke, Ben Reilly, aka Scarlet Spider. Yes, the infamous O'Hara's clone of Peter Parker makes an appearance as part of O'Hara's Spider Society, being seen as the incredibly angsty and dramatic one who's always narrating what he's doing. Oh, and he's also voiced by Andy Samberg, which is kind of fun. While it can be assumed that he has the same powers and abilities as nearly every other Spider person, the fact that O'Hara specifically picks him alongside Jessica to come with him to stop Miles further alludes to this. We don't see Ben actually do any fighting or anything cool really, since he gets knocked out by Gwen Stacy in one shot after getting distracted by his own narrating. Apologies to all the Ben Reilly fans out there. Another character who we only briefly see use their powers is Aaron Davis, aka the Prowler, specifically the Prowler from Universe 42. Although we don't see him entirely in uniform, Aaron still gets to show off his strength, his power, and his Prowler glove. He's got one heck of a punch, and given his obvious experience as a vigilante in this universe, we're sure that he can also put up a good fight. For now though, some of this is only speculation that we'll only get payoff for in the third film. Moving back over to the Spider People, let's talk about the Spider Society's tech support, Margot Kess, aka Spider-Bite, a virtual reality superhero. Like with Ben Reilly, we unfortunately don't get to see Margot actually fight or use many of her powers. However, we do see her use all her tech and virtual reality abilities to her advantage, such as when she divides herself to try and work on different computers at the same time. It's also implied that she's incredibly intelligent, just as intelligent as other Spider People, if not more so. Again, we'll have to wait until the third movie to see how she does out in the field, now that she's officially part of Gwen's rescue squad, and we certainly can't wait. But let's talk about someone who's gotten plenty of field experience, Peter B. Parker. Even when we saw him at his lowest point in the first Spider-Verse film, Peter B. proved to be very strong, powerful, and clever. While he doesn't get as many cool moments in the sequel, his abilities haven't slowed down much since becoming a dad. In fact, he's one of the few Spider People who's able to keep up with Miles when he goes on the run, and he's able to recognize when Miles is planning something. One thing we will say is that we can't exactly blame Peter B. for staying out of the actual fights, given that he has his baby daughter with him. But we do hope that he's able to get in a few more punches next time, as it never seems like the guy can't fight anymore. It's just a matter of circumstances and of not wanting to seriously hurt Miles. For our next character though, let's talk about someone a bit more bold and a bit more fiery, that being the Vulture. While many already know the Vulture as a bird-themed supervillain, this particular one is from a Renaissance-inspired universe. This not only gives him a super rad and unique art and animation style, but also a variety of brand new superpowers. Using hammer space, the Vulture is able to summon spikes, projectiles, and chains. He's also able to reform and rebuild his wings whenever they get damaged. He even takes a page out of Green Goblin's book with his mini bombs. As we've said before, all these powers and abilities turn him into a great mini-boss for our heroes. But while he puts up an incredibly good fight, the Vulture is still your typical villain of the week that is able to be overpowered and defeated once other Spider People show up. Speaking of those other Spider People, one of those included is Jessica Drew, aka Spider-Woman, second in command to O'Hara's Spider Society. You would think that, much like Peter in Mayday, Jessica being pregnant would force her to be more on the sidelines during fights. Thankfully, Jessica takes an exact opposite approach. She may not be on her actual feet much, but her motorcycle riding allows her to still keep up with everyone else, using the bike both as a speed boost and as something that can give her an awesome wheel punch. She's also got her own web shooters and is shown being pretty strategic, able to look more at the big picture and even being able to teach Gwen a few things, as Gwen states when she's catching up with Miles. But while her spot in the Spider Society gives her some additional authority, she still has to follow O'Hara's lead for the most part, stating repeatedly that she wouldn't be able to help Gwen if she got on O'Hara's bad side. We also see Miles defeat her fairly easily during the big chase scene, but considering that he's able to either defeat, disable, or outrun pretty much all of the Spider People in that scene, we're not going to dock all too many points from Jessica. From one Spider-Woman to another, let's move on to Gwen Stacy. For the first act of this movie, we get to see Gwen in action, and she certainly hasn't lost any steps since the first film. Strong, strategic, and incredibly graceful, it isn't often that Gwen truly gets herself in a corner. We do see the Vulture briefly capture her, leading to O'Hara and Jessica needing to step in. But it's more just a moment of weakness and being briefly overpowered than Gwen actually lacking in any power. One thing we will praise is Gwen's ability to stay calm under pressure and handle multiple threats and dangers at once. as we see when she has to stop a helicopter from landing on a crowd of people. Gwen is also shown being very stealthy, to the point of Miles briefly losing sight of her, which then allows Gwen a moment to try and follow her Spider Society assigned mission. Add in the fact that, like Peter B., Gwen is able to keep up with Miles and O'Hara during the big chase, and she easily shines as one of the more powerful Spider-Women. But while Gwen's dancing abilities have allowed her to be a great acrobat, it could be argued that Pavatir Prabhakar, aka Spider-Man India, may just be a greater acrobat. It may just be due to his more lax and optimistic attitude, but even with his lack of experience, he is incredibly talented as a superhero. In addition to being acrobatic and well-balanced, he's also speedy and just as strong as any other Spider person, being able to save an entire bus full of people from falling off a bridge. We may not see him win any fights, but when it comes to saving and rescuing people, he manages to be a total success, and we can't wait to see more of his fighting skills. Though if you want a Spider-Man with a bit more brawn on his side, look no further than Hobart Hobie Brown, aka Spider-Punk. While his most noticeable feature may be his specific magazine clip art-like art style, the guy's got some true power on his side. Though it's debatable whether or not it was due to Miles weakening it, he was still able to completely break through an electric force field with just his guitar. Like with other people, he's great at web slinging and rescuing others, and thanks to his backstory, he's got a ton of experience regarding not just fighting off bad guys, but also fighting off a totalitarian society as a whole. But while much of Hobie's appeal may be how bombastic and powerful he is, he also has his clever moments. He's able to keep a fairly low-key cover within the Spider Society, allowing him to keep an eye on them until he decides to quit. We also see him subtly snatching up things from the Spider Society's lab, which he uses to create a new dimension-traveling watch that he gives to Gwen. Not bad for a punk, and seeing all this makes it all the more amazing that he's able to keep up with the film's three main players. Speaking of which, the Bronze Medal of Power has to go to Miles Morales. Really, it shouldn't be much of a surprise to see Miles this high up, thanks to his own unique powers as well as his intelligence and strategic abilities. In case you missed the first film, in addition to having all the typical Spider skills, abilities, and web shooters, Miles also has two extra powers. His electrical Spider Shock attack, which is powerful enough to destroy the Spider Society's capture force field, and his ability to go invisible, granting him extra stealth. We also get to see just how clever and scrappy Miles is able to be during the big Spider Society chase sequence, where he's able to either outrun or outmaneuver nearly everyone on his tail. Ultimately, he can't overpower all of them, hence why he uses an impromptu plan to get all the Spider people away from the machine that'll send him to his home dimension. Really, if this is how powerful he is at only 15, Miles not only has a ton of power in his own right, but he's also got a ton of potential. For our Silver Medal of Power, we're giving it to Miguel O'Hara, aka Spider-Man 2099. As described by Gwen, he's a ninja vampire who's incredibly strong, fierce, and when it comes to capturing his target, absolutely relentless. He runs like a beast and seems to have the most strength and speed out of all the Spider people we see. Though we don't see much of them in use, we also can't forget his more vampiric abilities, as well as his status as the leader of the Spider Society. This grants him access to additional tech that he can use to capture enemies and targets alike. The only time where anyone ever gets an advantage over him is when Miles briefly electrocutes him with his Spider Shock. Outside of that, O'Hara is seen as the best of the best when it comes to power and ability, so it tracks that only a villain that defies logic and reality would be able to outmatch him. Finally, the Gold Medal of Power is being awarded to Dr. Jonathan Owen, aka the Spot. Now, looking at Spot at the beginning of the film, he really doesn't seem like much. He sometimes loses control of his portals, with his fighting style based more on confusion and accidents than actual skill. And at one point, he ends up kicking his own butt. But once Spot discovers his portal's true ability, he takes it upon himself to try and gain more power. And he certainly does. He becomes stronger and more precise with his portals, which pretty much become like black holes after a certain point. He's able to outfight other Spider people, and his portals are seen bringing down entire buildings and bridges. And mind you, this is only the beginning. By the time he returns to his original dimension, Spot has a whole new form and a ton of power at his disposal, making him in his quest to take away everything Miles loves all the more intimidating.
There have been many cartoons depicting everyone's favorite web slinger over the years. Each iteration brings something new to the table, but none are quite as beloved as the spectacular Spider-Man. While it was prematurely cut short after 2 seasons, it has developed a large cult following, with many people demanding that it be brought back. It's still remembered fondly to this day because its stories were well written. Its characters felt believable, which may be why many feel that it's the best Spider-Man show ever. But today we'll be discussing the characters, from Spider-Man and his friends to the most deranged and evil criminals he fights. We will sort out the best and worst this show has to offer. I'm Kifinosi with Wicked Binge, and this is the Spectacular Spider-Man. Good to evil. Kicking off the good section of the video, we feel that it's only fitting to give the gold medal of goodness to Peter Parker, aka Spider-Man. Peter is a kind and caring friend. He stands for goodness and strives to be a better person, which perfectly complements his role as Spider-Man. There's a lot of pressure on his shoulders. He has to deal with his aunt's inability to make ends meet, his ailing social life, and being a superhero.
What's he? Is he?
All of these while keeping everyone he cares about in the dark about his identity. Now, he can be clueless romantically. He has trouble choosing between Liz and Gwen, much to the annoyance of both. He tries to have a healthy relationship with his friend Harry, whose father makes it clear that he prefers Peter instead. As Spider-Man, he is constantly dealing with evil criminals and supervillains who want to kill him. He usually handles all of this well. The only time he ever wavered was when he was under the symbiote's influence, which we won't count against him. He really is a true hero and deserves the gold medal of goodness. The silver medal of goodness goes to Gwen Stacy, Peter's friend and love interest. Gwen is quiet and friendly with a good head on her shoulders. She had deep feelings for her friend Peter. While Peter feels the same, he's romantically inept and has little to no idea how she feels. Gwen is Peter's equal intellectually, having the same grades as him and even being selected to work in the same lab. While she may be shy and geeky, she has no problem telling off Peter and Harry when they fool around, giving them her famous look, which can unnerve most people. Gwen and Peter eventually went on to date others while they still had feelings for each other. However, she became less assertive when it came to dating Harry. She wouldn't break up with him after his father's death to spare his feelings, even though she liked Peter. She's an amazing friend and has all of Peter's admirable traits despite not being a superhero. It makes sense why she receives the Silver Medal of Goodness. Now we have to talk about Gwen's father, Captain George Stacy, who gets the Bronze Medal of Goodness. As captain of the NYPD, he is naturally an honorable man. He is slow to judge, acts quickly to save others, and is respectful to Spider-Man despite other cops not taking his presence too well. He passed his good morals on to his daughter Gwen, whom he loves dearly. He has been an unknowing mentor towards Peter, who takes lessons from the captain into account when he's Spider-Man. What drops him to the Bronze Medal is that he was willing to work with Dr. Octopus to steal information that would give him access to the world power grid. However, that was only because Dr. Octopus had his daughter, so we won't blame him for obeying. It has also been hinted throughout the series' run that he knows that Peter is Spider-Man, but he would never leak that information if he does know. Overall, he is an upstanding member of society and the worthy recipient of the Bronze Medal of Goodness. Just outside the top 3 most good is Peter's Aunt May. She is a sweet lady who sees the good in almost everything. She loves Peter dearly. She and her late husband Uncle Ben taught him from a young age to be a good person, which helped shape Peter's moral backbone. She cannot make ends meet and desperately tries to hide financial woes from Peter just so he won't worry. We also have to give her points for introducing him to Mary Jane, who becomes a close friend to him. She also tries to push Peter into enjoying himself, fearing how much he worries about her. But she does a fair share of worrying about him, as she sets up curfews for him and checks in with him near constantly, which can border on being annoying.
Aunt May, you're awake.
However, she is truly a good aunt and a great support system for Peter. Another one of Peter's friends, Mary Jane Watson, is next.
I saved the last dance for you, Tiger.
She chooses to remain a social free agent and not date anyone, being an independent person above all else. She uses said independence to help other people, such as Peter, Gwen, and Harry. Mary Jane usually helps Peter navigate through his lackluster social life and help him make friends, even warding away people who dislike him. This is seen when she fires back witty retorts at Flash when he tries to make fun of Peter. She also warns Peter that Eddie Brock is out to get him. Like Gwen, she also keeps Peter on the straight and narrow. In that regard, she tries to open his eyes about Gwen liking him. On top of that, she never loses faith in others. In fact, she dated Liz's brother Mark when he had a severe gambling addiction and ended up becoming the villain known as the Molten Man. She always tried to help him. With everything she does for others, Peter has a valuable friend in Mary Jane. Next, we'll give a quick mention to the top field journalist of the Daily Bugle, Frederick Foswell. Foswell doesn't play a big role, but he is one of the few Bugle staff who actually likes Spider-Man. He helps Peter become a better photographer and helps him break stories in the world of undercover crime. He even moonlights as a criminal informant named Patch, just to get information to publish so it can lead to criminals getting arrested. He even played a part in getting the crime boss Silvermane thrown in prison.
Beat it, small fry.
He uses his role as a journalist to fight for the truth and stop crime. He's a hero in his own right. A different Peter love interest is next, Liz Allen. Liz is one of the school cheerleaders and Flash Thompson's ex-girlfriend. She's had significant character growth throughout the series and improves as a person. She started out as the stereotypical shallow cheerleader, but she became gentler and more sensitive after befriending Peter.
Thought you said this stuff was boring.
Eventually, she became Peter's girlfriend, much to Flash's chagrin. While she did become better, we have to dock her a few goodness points due to her dislike of Gwen, who she feels will steal Peter away. Not to mention her angry reaction to Peter breaking up with her. Regardless, she changed for the better, and these are just minor gripes. She's a peppy and upbeat person who only wants everyone, especially Peter, to be happy. We have to mention another Daily Bugle employee, Robbie Robertson. As J. Jonah Jameson's right-hand man, Robbie is usually there to reel in his grouchy boss and help the other employees.
There's photos of Spider-Man in action.
He views Spider-Man as a true hero and believes in capturing the more admirable aspects of him, only for Jameson to shoot him down. Overall, he's kind to everyone else on the staff and is willing to give Peter some journalism pointers. He's a pleasant guy and treats Peter as a journalistic equal when Jameson will not, and that says a lot about him. Yet another Daily Bugle employee deserves mention, Betty Brandt. She's the Daily Bugle's receptionist. Like Robbie, she keeps Jameson from going off the deep end. She showed genuine compassion to Peter and was upfront about her being too old for him when he asked her out. However, she still cares about Peter and enjoys his company. She's not a huge character, but her kindness and straightforward personality earn her a spot in the good section. Let's mention Dr. Martha Connors next. As Kurt Connors' wife, she partakes in the same experiments as her husband and is the voice of reason between the two. She's welcoming to Peter and Gwen when they first start working for them, and she was happy to be their mentor. However, she is relatively no nonsense. She was quick to fire Peter when he reported the lizard story, even though he left Dr. Connors out of it.
But I can't trust you.
But she welcomed him back at Norman Osborn's request, so at least there weren't too many hard feelings. One of Midtown High's football stars gets the next spot, Hobie Brown. Hobie doesn't talk. By that we mean there's a running joke of him always getting cut off before he gets to say anything. From what we know, we can tell that he's a nice guy and doesn't partake in the usual Peter torment that the rest of the team does.
Don't worry, Brown, you're in.
Also, he was able to step up and lead Midtown High's play when Harry couldn't make it, so we get some goodness points for that. While Hobie isn't an important character, there isn't a bad bone in his body. Flash's main love interest is next, Shashan. Shashan is a collected and school-oriented student who becomes the object of Flash's affection. However, she initially wasn't even interested.
Really, Flash, there's no point.
She is friendly with other people and has no negative words for anyone, even people who bother her. She rejected Flash constantly and only dated him when he started to grow as a person. She even helped him become nicer and career-driven, making her responsible for his redemption arc and worthy of a spot on the good section. Another Midtown High football player and student is next, Rand Robertson.
School.
He is a decent person, and he is one of the more likable football team members. He was the only one who gave Peter and Harry a fair chance when they tried out, and he was willing to accept them into their friend group, much to the dismay of Flash. He's easygoing and takes everything in stride. There isn't much that phases him, from people flirting with his girlfriend Sally to Flash telling him off for being friendly to Peter. He just says, it's cool, and lets it go. Flash could honestly learn a lot from him. While talking about Midtown High students, we'll throw in Glory Grant here.
I'm serious.
She's Kenny's girlfriend and is also nice to others outside of their circle. She's quick to admonish Kenny for acting like a jerk, and she briefly breaks up with him after she's had enough of his boorish ways. And then she decided to date Harry. The only negative we can say about her is that she dumped Harry at the fall formal when Kenny returned and tried to change, which isn't the best thing to do. But she's okay if we ignore that. The last entry for the good tier has to go to Dr. Kurt Connors.
It's an honor to meet you, Dr. Connors.
He is a sensible guy and an approachable boss, being open to new interns working in the lab and trying to show he cares about those in his employ. However, he is desperate to regrow his lost arm, making him take drastic measures by using an untested formula on himself to regrow his arm. And it works, for a time. He eventually becomes the vicious lizard and causes havoc, but Spider-Man was able to save him. However, he and his wife fired Peter because he set up cameras to capture the fight to sell photos. Connors was able to get back on track and stood up to his new partner, Miles Warren, citing his lack of ethics. He may have had a big lizard-related mishap, but his heart is in the right place. We've wrapped up the good tier and we're on to the characters who fall somewhere in the neutral territory. This is the gray area. Starting the gray area is Peter's best friend, Harry Osborn.
Hey, Pete!
To put it nicely, Harry is a mess. He's a social outcast alongside Peter. However, whereas Peter has Aunt May to help him, Harry doesn't have that support system. His father views him as a disappointment. Harry's father, Norman, makes it clear that he favors Peter over Harry. On top of that, he even framed Harry for being the Green Goblin. Harry then started taking a substance called Green, which is an experimental drug that enhances strength and mind power. He used this to become a football star and be an A student, all because he wanted to impress his father. Harry is an overall good kid. He plays off all of his issues and just wants to be liked and make friends. Still, he did use his father's apparent death to keep Gwen in a relationship with him, which is all kinds of wrong. Still, given everything he has gone through, we can't blame him too much. Let's talk about Flash Thompson. He's Midtown High's starting quarterback and resident jerk. He usually torments Peter by throwing water balloons at him, stealing his lunch, and taunting him mercilessly. Sometimes he even targets Harry and Gwen. He's extremely arrogant and believes that he can treat people however he wants just because he's popular. While these may seem like the traits of someone who should be lower on this list, he tries to change. It started when Peter was becoming hostile towards everyone when he was under the symbiote's influence. Flash called him out on it, then Liz dumped him and started going out with Peter. Eventually, Flash began to like Shashan, which made him change as he didn't want to look like a bully anymore. He has a long way to go, but he has grown a lot as a person. Now we have to cover Kenny Kong next. Kenny is Flash's partner in crime, and it's easy to see why. They both like picking on people weaker than them, specifically Peter, and they love playing football. What puts Kenny lower is that he is ruder and more boorish than Flash, and less self-aware, often embarrassing himself and his friends. Luckily, he has made an effort to be better, apologizing for his behavior.
But Glory...
He has his girlfriend Glory to keep him in line, which is a plus. Overall, he isn't bad per se, but he is a follower. We'll also give a quick mention to Ned Lee, a journalist from the Daily Bugle.
You were one of the first individuals rescued by the Spider-Man.
He's obsessed with exposing Spider-Man and wants the world to know who's behind the mask. When Venom leaked his secret identity, Lee became overeager in his expose article about Peter Parker. He interviews his friends and family and pressures them into saying yes. He also interrogates Peter for the truth. We don't know why Ned behaves this way, he just really wants to show who's under the mask and he will do anything to find out. Up next is the final person in Flash's clique, Rand's girlfriend, Sally Averill. Sally is a stereotypical, shallow, popular girl. She views unpopular people as being beneath her. She warned Liz about the dangers of crossing social lines when Liz started going out with Peter. Oh boy, she's abrasive, short-tempered, and snobby, and she has a special disdain for Peter and his friends.
Who invited the Geek Squad?
She isn't in the evil tier because she has a nice side, like when she showed concern for Peter's Aunt May's health. She's also had an emotional breakdown when she thought Peter was blown up. She has a soft side, but you have to do some digging to find it. Finally ending the gray area is Colonel John Jameson. He was an upstanding Air Force colonel, but tragedy struck when he was infected with alien spores while in outer space. This caused his density and muscle mass to fluctuate violently. His father, J. Jonah Jameson, prodded him into becoming a superhero named Colonel Jupiter and bring down Spider-Man.
I get to wear the fancy suit.
Colonel Jupiter became unhinged due to his father's anti-Spider-Man rhetoric. The alien spores also altered his brain, causing him to have severe bouts of rage targeting Spider-Man, who was able to reverse the side effects. When the Colonel lost his powers, he became a mentally unstable asylum patient, all because his father pushed him into it. With that, we have to ask, what kind of superhero show good to evil would this be without including the villains? We're going to cover all the evildoers that Spidey has to face next. These are the bad and the evil. The evil section begins with the cat burglar, Walter Hardy, the man who shot Uncle Ben. Walter Hardy was a famous cat burglar who could infiltrate the most heavily fortified areas and steal from them.
I made a horrible mistake.
There was no job quite impossible for him, but he had to carry a weapon as he got older and slower, vowing to never hurt anyone until he accidentally shot Uncle Ben. It's a mistake that haunted him for the rest of his life. We don't put him lower because when his daughter, the Black Cat, tried to break him out, he refused to escape and stayed behind, saying that he deserved his punishment. Walter even helped Spider-Man and Black Cat escape from the villains who had broken out while staying behind to apprehend them. We had to cover him sooner or later, so the editor-in-chief of the Daily Bugle is next, J. Jonah Jameson. Oh boy, where to start with this guy? Let's start off with the fact that he is a horrible boss.
What do you know about selling papers? You're a kid!
He screams at his employees, belittles them, and treats them like drones. He has a penchant for slander and yellow journalism. As he puts it, the Bugle only prints facts, and whatever it takes to connect the facts together. Not exactly showing journalistic integrity. Also, he has a profound, misguided hatred for Spider-Man. It is never explained why, but he takes every opportunity to smear and slander the webhead. All of this would have been forgivable. However, what puts him in the evil category is that he prodded his son John into becoming Colonel Jupiter and going after Spider-Man. This caused his son to give in to the Spore's alteration of his brain. After his son was defeated, the blame for what happened to his son's mental state falls solely on Jameson. He's simply a hateful and loudmouthed man who pushes his views on others and can't see past his own notions of the world. Up next is one of the show's more well-known villains, Sandman. Sandman started off as Flint Marko, a small-time crook obsessed with robbing banks and jewelry stores, among other places, to obtain his big score. After undergoing an experiment that turned Marko into Sandman, he went on a robbing spree that saw him face-to-face with Spider-Man numerous times. He eventually joined Dr. Octopus's Sinister Six to seek revenge on the Wallcrawler. While this may all sound terrible, the reason we can't rank him lower is that he isn't loyal to any villain in particular. He's just in it for his big score and doesn't want to hurt anyone.
I've had bad experiences with cats.
He even sabotaged an operation that would have had Tombstone's men siphon oil from a tanker, helping Spider-Man put a stop to it and save the crew. He leaves the New York crime scene with the intent of bettering himself and turning away from crime altogether. Black Cat takes the next spot. She follows in her father's footsteps of being a cat burglar. She uses her stealth abilities to infiltrate secure areas and steal their valuables. She also tries to seduce Spider-Man to get him to join her as her partner in crime. She has no real morals and is in love with how corrupt she is.
I want it.
She doesn't even try to change, despite Spider-Man and even her father telling her that she has the potential to be more. She tried to break her father, Walter, out of prison. Despite hearing her father's wishes to stay and help her escape instead, she blames Spider-Man for her father's choice not to go. She's not really malevolent, but she's far from a good person. Liz's brother, Mark Allen, the Molten Man, is next. Mark is a teenager with a severe gambling issue, and even did time in juvenile detention for it. Still, once he got out, he fell back to his old ways, knowing full well that it hurt everyone around him. He had serious debt already while he was in custody. He was forced by the Green Goblin and Blackie Gaxton into taking a serum that would give him a natural metal armor that could heat itself to molten temperatures. He was told to kill Spider-Man to be fixed, which he gladly obliged to, wanting to return to normal.
Eliminate Spider-Man.
Molten Man showed no mercy while fighting, and would harm others if it meant going back to normal. While he was defeated, he harbored a deep hatred for Spider-Man, swearing revenge for being sent back into custody. Next is Silvermane's daughter, Silver Sable. She is a cunning and ruthless assassin for her father's crime family. She does whatever her father orders, such as stealing blueprints to make Rhino armor or doing away with Silvermane's enemies, including Spider-Man. It is later revealed that she used to date Hammerhead. They eventually broke up because her father fired him, and she chose loyalty to Silvermane over Hammerhead.
Daddy was so right to fire you.
Long story short, she's more of a weapon to her father than a daughter. She will do whatever is asked of her to keep her father's operations going smoothly. Next, we'll throw in Chameleon. Chameleon is an international spy for hire and a dangerous master of disguise. He has no true loyalty to anyone and only cares about his next big assignment. He has done his own work before, such as framing Spider-Man for stealing the symbiote and impersonating him to commit crimes. He's also impersonated Norman Osborn to keep Spider-Man guessing about the Green Goblin's identity. This shows that Chameleon has no moral compass and will work for anyone. Luckily, Spider-Man always finds a way to foil him. This next spot is split between 3 people: the Enforcers, named Shocker, Ricochet, and Ox. They are mercenaries for hire, and they specialize in doing the most difficult tasks that others would say are too dangerous or risky. Their leader, Shocker, is the most well-known member. He joined the Sinister Six and has done solo jobs that mostly involved stopping Spider-Man. Ricochet is the stealth of the group, being almost like Spider-Man in his agility and hand-to-hand combat. He wears a suit that can absorb and disperse kinetic energy, allowing him to literally bounce off the walls. Ox is the group's muscle. As the strong and silent type, he is intimidating. Being stronger than most people, he can easily break Spider-Man's webs. These 3 are dangerous, but they are routinely stopped by Spider-Man.
We're just getting started, Spidey.
Next up, Professor Miles Warren. Professor Warren is the brother of Peter's science teacher and a really corrupt person. He is close to Norman Osborn and can use Osborn's influence to get what he wants. He even forced Dr. Connors to let Peter back as an intern after they had alleged trust issues.
We had trust issues with Peter.
The biggest concern first came when Professor Warren tricked Craven into thinking that he had created Spider-Man. He coerced Craven into giving up a large sum of money to be transformed into a lion-like monster. Worst of all, Warren took over Dr. Connors' lab by threatening to expose him as the Lizard, forcing him to move to Florida. He's a shady guy, and sadly we never get to see his defeat as the series ended early. Now we have to throw in Blackie Gaxton. Gaxton is a bookie who runs the Big Sky Billiards Room, a place that the city's shadiest people can hang out in, free of the law. To put it simply, Gaxton is a lowlife who takes advantage of clients who come to him for bets. He even lured Mark Allen back to a gambling addiction after he had gotten clean. He even knows all the sketchy activity in the city. He knows every crime boss and what they control, all while profiting off of it by keeping their secrets. Gaxton is horrible, and unfortunately he can weasel his way out of any situation just by sharing his knowledge in exchange for freedom. What an awful man.
Trust me, kid, it's a lock.
We'll briefly talk about Tinkerer next. Tinkerer is a technological genius who has all the greatest gadgets and weapons for the city's worst people, such as Chameleon, Mysterio, the Enforcers, and Dr. Octopus. He is very loyal to his clients, often giving free equipment should they give him more power. This is seen when Dr. Octopus tried to take over all of the world's technology, and Tinkerer would provide him with machinery in exchange for working with the new Sinister Six.
Gentlemen, allow me to introduce our host and benefactor.
However, he is cowardly and useless in a fight, and often gives information should he be threatened. Kraven the Hunter is up next. Kraven was a hunter on safaris where he was known to take down the most vicious of animals. However, he was tempted by Dr. Octopus to hunt Spider-Man, who is considered a dangerous and elusive game. However, Spider-Man humiliated him and got away, much to Kraven's anger. He paid Miles Warren to give him a serum that would transform him into the ultimate predator. This lion-like monstrosity had the senses and strength of all the jungle cats. Kraven even worked with Dr. Octopus's new Sinister Six to take down Spider-Man, being hell-bent on hunting and defeating him once and for all. Kraven is naturally wild and bestial, but his eagerness to hunt Spidey, who is human, puts him this low. On top of that, Kraven is also known to sick his pet lion on those who displease him. He's ruthless and will do anything necessary to complete his hunt. He will not rest until he has finally killed Spider-Man. Kraven is a villain, no questions about it.
Do not patronize me, Calypso.
Next, we reach another famous villain, the Master of Illusion, Mysterio. Mysterio is an expert in trickery and special effects, making him elusive and hard to arrest, as well as a dangerous member of Chameleon's gang. However, what sets him apart is that he is more of a large-scale threat than Chameleon. He has no problem with causing harm to anyone to make his illusions seem real. Eventually, he ended up working for Dr. Octopus, stealing technology to help him control the world's power grids. Mysterio is a very dangerous adversary. He has many robots designed to look just like him, making him difficult to pin down. He's arrogant and a little crazy. His desire to be known amongst the criminal underworld means he will pull off some drastic heists and other projects.
And let anyone take credit for the role of Mysterio?
This makes him unpredictable and a worthy adversary for Spidey. Sandman's partner in crime, Rhino, takes the next spot. Before he became a supervillain, Alex O'Hearn was a petty crook alongside his friend Flint Marko, who would become the Sandman. When Tombstone bailed them out of prison, O'Hearn underwent an experiment that would transform him into the unstoppable Rhino. It was fitting, as he loved to cause destruction with his newfound power, and made a point of trashing everywhere he went just because he could. He's naturally violent and tried to find and threaten Peter to lead him to Spider-Man.
Bring me Peter Parker!
He even tried to impale Spider-Man with his horn while the web-slinger was unconscious. What sets him apart from his friend Sandman is that Rhino makes no attempt to better himself and genuinely seems to enjoy causing harm to others. Thankfully for Spider-Man, Rhino isn't that bright and is easily tricked, making him slightly manageable to defeat. As we descend into the truly evil, we reach Tombstone's second-in-command, Hammerhead. Hammerhead serves as an enforcer for Tombstone, often doing his dirty work, such as shady business dealings, extortion, and worse. He tasks Norman Osborn to create supervillains to keep Spider-Man busy while he helps run Tombstone's criminal empire. On top of that, he isn't someone you want angry at you, as he enjoys fighting and breaking other people with his steel-plated head. What makes him more than a mere lackey is his willingness to betray his boss by manipulating events during a fight between rival crime bosses. He leaves his boss during the fight in hopes that he would take over Tombstone's empire should his boss be defeated. Make no mistake, Hammerhead isn't a mere stooge. He's only out for himself.
Well, wouldn't you like to know?
One of NYC's oldest and most powerful crime bosses takes the next spot, Silvermane. Silvermane's criminal empire ruled the streets of New York for decades, until a young Frederick Foswell's articles on him got Silvermane arrested. When he got out, he started going to war with Tombstone and Dr. Octopus to get his territory back. He used underhanded means to steal valuable information to make new weapons for his empire. Worse yet, he dragged his daughter into the crime family, making her his own personal weapon. Silvermane has little to no empathy for anyone. His harsh ways have even manifested in his daughter. He basically corrupts everything around him, and it seems that no prison can hold him for long.
Silvio Manfredi has arrived.
The first villain the show introduced, the Vulture, is next.
Good news. I don't blame you anymore.
Vulture was always mean-spirited and bitter. After his inventions were stolen by Norman Osborn and he was promptly fired, he went on to become a supervillain to extort Osborn and even try to kill him. Since then, he has sided with Dr. Octopus and the Sinister Six to get revenge on Spider-Man for putting him away. This has led to Vulture becoming even worse, from terrorizing the New York FBI headquarters to helping Dr. Octopus establish a criminal empire. Vulture also enjoys terrorizing bystanders during fights, often capturing people just to drop them, or swooping low to assault them. All of this just to keep Spider-Man busy during fights so he can get away. The fifth most evil character from Spectacular Spider-Man is Electro. Ironically, he started out as a sympathetic character, after a freak accident left him as a human electricity generator.
I can't take it anymore!
He threatened Kurt Connors for a cure and was promptly defeated by Spider-Man. While he originally wanted a cure, he grew to love his role as a villain, joining the Sinister Six and becoming more and more unstable with every appearance. In fact, calling him by his original name, Max, sends him flying into an uncontrollable rage and he destroys everything in sight. Electro has a deep hatred for Spider-Man, becoming irrationally violent whenever he sees him. Even worse, he's known to take his frustrations out on civilians whenever he can't find Spider-Man, by sending lightning bolts into crowds. He may have started out just wanting his life back, but he became one of the most evil characters on the show. Landing just outside the top 3 most evil is New York's biggest crime boss, L. Thompson Lincoln, aka the Big Man, aka Tombstone. He was born with a rare case of albinism that made his skin tougher and more durable, as well as granting him extra strength. While he looks scary, he hides his evil side under a persona of philanthropy and goodwill. However, in reality, he heads the largest criminal empire in New York. He has most of New York's crooks under his thumb. He owns one of the largest businesses in Manhattan as a front, and also employs people like Norman Osborn to create supervillains for him, just to keep Spider-Man busy, so that the webhead won't be able to investigate him. Almost everything that goes on in New York's criminal underbelly, Tombstone either ordered or knows about. Most of all, he isn't afraid to get his hands dirty and fight people himself. However, Spider-Man was able to finally defeat him and turn him into the cops. While he was released on bail, the NYPD deconstructed his criminal empire and had him under a close watch. This rendered the Big Man unable to return to being a crime boss, now just a citizen, with a colorful criminal record.
Meet L. Thompson Lincoln.
Taking home the Bronze Medal of Evil is Norman Osborn, or the Green Goblin. As Norman Osborn, he's a hard-nosed industrialist who never apologizes and constantly belittles his own son, Harry. As the Green Goblin, he is insane and wants to control the criminal underworld. Only one thing motivates him: greed, as shown when he eagerly accepts a large sum of money to create supervillains for Tombstone.
I never do.
He steals Adrian Toomes' ideas for a zero-gravity flight suit to profit off of them, and became the Green Goblin just to take control of Tombstone's empire. Though easily his worst deed was framing his son Harry as the Goblin, just to throw suspicion off of himself. Norman is a horrible man and an even worse father. In the series' final episode, Spider-Man sabotaged his glider and he fell into a vat of pumpkin bombs. Then Green Goblin was blown up? Or was he? Well, since the series ended prematurely, we'll never know for sure. The Silver Medal of Evil goes to Eddie Brock and his alter ego, Venom. Brock and Peter started out the series as close friends. However, a series of mishaps and trust issues led to Eddie developing a bitter hatred for Peter and Spider-Man. When Spidey freed himself of the symbiote's influence, it bonded with Eddie and revealed Peter's identity. With newfound powers and calling himself Venom, he swore his revenge. Venom is twisted and vengeful. His only purpose in life is to kill Peter/Spidey, and his favorite method is targeting people close to Peter, such as Aunt May or Gwen. After he was defeated for the first time, he decided to barge into the Daily Bugle and leak Spider-Man's secret identity to J. Jonah Jameson. The Bugle, of course, published it, and Peter couldn't go anywhere without being hounded by the media. But Spider-Man was able to defeat Venom by forcing a gene cleanser down his throat, which made Eddie incompatible with the symbiote, leaving him powerless.
Peter Parker is Spider-Man!
Subsequently, the Bugle printed a retraction and Peter was cleared. Finally, we reach the Gold Medal of Evil, and it goes to Dr. Octopus. A freak accident left him insane and with 4 mechanical arms fused to his back. Dr. Otto Octavius then ditched his meek and insecure personality to become the evil Dr. Octopus. First, he goes on a rampage across the city and tries to steal from one of his old employers. When he chases Spider-Man to an amusement park, he decides to kidnap Liz just to take advantage of Spider-Man's weakness that he can't stand to see anyone hurt. This would become a running theme, as almost every time they fight, Octopus drags innocent people into it just to hurt them, simply because, well, he can. He also created the Sinister Six to wreak havoc on the city and get even with Spider-Man. Still, that's nothing compared to his worst action. He created his own crime syndicate under the alias Master Planner and kidnapped Gwen to make her father give him access to the FBI database so he could control the world power grid. By controlling the world's power, he could control the world by purposely making all technology stop functioning and go haywire. He was actually able to control New York's power for a time. He just made everything devolve into chaos, and that's what sets him apart from the other villains. Green Goblin is motivated by money and power, Venom is motivated by revenge, but Dr. Octopus just wants to watch the world burn.
Farewell, Spider-Man.
Finally, let's wrap this up and award some deadly sin medals. The Darwin medal goes to Rhino. Rhino is incredibly stupid and is easily outsmarted by Spidey, making him easier to defeat. The Pride medal goes to Flash Thompson, as he has a large ego and believes that just because he plays football, he's better than everyone else. The Sloth medal goes to Ned Lee. He is usually seen slacking off instead of writing stories for the Bugle, and always has to be yelled at to get back to work. The Wrath medal goes to J. Jonah Jameson. Jameson is always screaming at or threatening his employees, and he has a deep hatred for Spider-Man, for some reason. The Gluttony medal goes to Kenny Kong, who is never not eating, and he loves seeing how many chips he can fit in his mouth. The Envy medal goes to Harry Osborn, since he desperately wants his father's approval and hates that Peter gets it instead. The Greed medal goes to Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin, since he only cares about his status and power. He just wants to make himself richer. Finally, the Lust medal goes to Black Cat, seeing as she's always flirting with Spider-Man and uses her advances in attempts to make him join her.
No beast has ever broken the grip of Kravinov.
Oh, okay, I think I see the confusion.
Get ready, true believers. We've got quite the video in store for you all today. We're looking at the many vile villains of the spectacular Spider-Man and deciding the best ways the justice system could deal with them. There's no Spider-Man nor epic battles in New York here, just a collection of villains and the court of law. With all that laid out, it's time to get this court into session. I'm Keefe Inosi with Wicked Binge, and this is sentencing spectacular Spider-Man villains for their crimes. Let's start this video off with one of the smaller villains, shall we? First up to the stand today is the Black Cat herself. Like all other versions of this character, Black Cat is a thief. From jewelry to cash, Felicia Hardy sees all of it as hers for the taking. She's even tried to steal the alien symbiote in one episode. Because of that, we can immediately mark her down as being guilty of theft.
I think like a thief.
In one of her later appearances, she breaks into the vault, a very secure prison, in an effort to get her father out. That means she's also committed an act of breaking and entering. Those are two pretty bad crimes to have attached to your name, but with Felicia, it's important to remember that she is still very young. Not only that, but her criminal actions are mostly done for her father. She doesn't steal just because she finds it fun or has a desire for evil, but simply to help out her father.
Gee, Dad, what'd you do to this guy?
Despite being so young, it seems like Black Cat has more humanity than a lot of the other villains in Spidey's rogues gallery. When she enters the vault to find her father, she decides not to free him due to the nature of the crimes he has committed. Once again, we see she has a moral compass that most characters we'll be covering today do not have. As a result of all this, we've decided to give Miss Hardy a house arrest sentence. Her heart is in the right place, but being around banks and prisons, not so much. This feels like the appropriate punishment given her crimes and her character. At the very least, all the other villains will be wishing they got off this easily. Going from a cat-themed kind of antagonist to a full-on antagonist who can turn into a cat. Our next villain of the day is the imposing Kraven the Hunter. Just like his name implies, Kraven is obsessed with the hunt. And there is no being he's more enamored with in his pursuit of the hunt than the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man.
Kraven the Hunter.
He tries multiple times throughout the show to kill Spidey. Sounds like some maybe attempted murder to us. He stalks the wall crawler just as he would any of his other victims, adding a stalking charge to his rap sheet. Last but not least, Kraven becomes guilty of breaking and entering when he enters Ravencroft to get Electro and Doc Ock out of prison, although he only succeeds in getting one of them out. Overall, Kraven the Hunter isn't the most vile villain to hit the Big Apple. After all, he loves animals. That's one good thing going for him. Still, his love of the animal kingdom doesn't absolve him of trying to kill a teenager and aiding many of the other supervillains. So for all those reasons, we decided this Hunter will spend the next 15 years locked in a cage. Maybe after all that time, Kraven will think twice about breaking out criminals. Yeah, probably not, but it's the thought that counts. Next up is the big man himself, Tombstone. Unlike Felicia or Kraven, Tombstone isn't the type of villain to break into jail or steal jewels. Instead, he hires other criminals to do his dirty work for him. For example, he enlists Hammerhead to try and destroy Spider-Man in one of his first appearances.
Shut the door on your way out.
Off of just that one plan, we can incriminate Tombstone for not only attempted murder, but also conspiring, something he does frequently throughout the show. Third and finally, we're gonna charge Tombstone with corruption. He's a crime lord, so it does come with the territory, but it's one we definitely cannot overlook. He puts on a nice and polite image of himself as a charitable man to the public, when in reality, he only cares about gaining more and more power. It's now time to sentence the big guy, and we believe it's best if he spends 20 years behind bars. Quite frankly, Tombstone could have easily gotten an even harsher sentence, but since he does seem to have some sort sort of moral compass, as seen in his unlikely team-ups with Spidey, we let him off a little bit easy here. Besides, when you look at some of the villains coming up later and their crimes, Tombstone doesn't look quite so bad in comparison. It's now time to put one of Spider-Man's most classic villains, Dr. Octopus, to trial. Unlike his movie counterpart, this Doc Ock is all villainy. He doesn't have a tragic backstory nor understandable motivations. He's simply out to take over the entire world and to take down all who oppose him.
Call me Dr. Octopus!
Like essentially all the villains in this show, he tries to kill Spider-Man and other innocent civilians, so we can go ahead and charge him with attempted murder. Otto later participates in a jailbreak in his second appearance, adding another charge to his sentence. A later appearance features him kidnapping Captain Stacy, whom he only agrees to let go after he grants him permission to control every computer in New York. In one episode, he kidnaps a police officer and then blackmails him. When we said he was evil, we were not kidding. Throughout all of his appearances, Octavius frequently terrorizes and endangers the citizens of New York City. This makes him guilty of terrorism, the first but not last Spidey villain to be connected with that particular crime. Doc Ock is more than deserving of being recognized as one of Spider-Man's most dangerous villains, but unfortunately for him, the reward for that is something nobody would ever want. Dr. Octopus is the first villain of today to receive the death sentence. We have no idea how this would be inflicted on a man with 4 giant mechanical tentacles welded to his back, but we can imagine that it'll be anything but a pleasant experience. At the very least, Otto can rest knowing he'll be recognized for his actions, but one has to wonder if those actions could have been maybe better ones. Jumping from one member of the Sinister Six to another, introducing everyone's favorite southern savage, at least in this version, the Shocker. While he might not be as infamous as someone like Doc Ock or the Green Goblin, Shocker is not a villain to sneeze at either. A highly powerful criminal for hire, Shocker's enlisted on multiple occasions to kill Spider-Man. With the obvious attempted murder charge out of the way, Shocker also frequently robs banks and other venues in the series. Like we said, he's not a big-time bad guy like others in the show are. Stealing money and doing odd jobs for other villains are the main things Shocker does, and that's just fine by him. Later on, he breaks out of jail thanks to some help from the Green Goblin. His last notable criminal charge is vandalism, which we see him do plenty of in the show, but the most obvious time might be when he faces off against Spider-Man in an old theater. By the end of the fight, the theater is non-existent.
Next time, Bug. Go!
If that isn't vandalism, to say the least, we don't know what is. Although Shocker might be one of the Wall Crawler's less notable villains, I quite like him, and he remains a dangerous foe in his own right, and one you don't want to get on the wrong side of. It's time to release our verdict, and for the man known as Jackson Bryce, we give him 20 years in the Slammer. That might come as a shock to old Montana, but it makes sense given the amount of crimes he's committed and their severity. Who's old, flies in the air, and wants revenge on Norman Osborn? None other than Adrian Toomes, aka the Vulture, of course. After his invention is rejected by Oscorp, only for it to be unveiled later with no involvement from him, Toomes becomes deeply obsessed with taking down Osborn.
Osborn, you stole my work!
He both kidnaps and nearly murders Norman shortly after these events, with the timely arrival of Spider-Man being the main contributing factor to Vulture's plan not being successful. That's 2 offenses in one episode, and since he attacks both Spidey and Osborn, we can go ahead and charge him with assault as well. In addition to that, he's guilty of breaking out of jail not once, but 2 times. Vulture is incredibly narrow-minded in his pursuit of Osborn, and it's that refusal to change and let go of the past that gets Toomes 20 years in prison. Needless to say, this is one Vulture that won't be taking flight anytime in the near future. Our next villain might just be the most appropriately named villain in all of Spider-Man lore. It's the Chameleon. Somewhat akin to an actual chameleon, this antagonist often disguises himself as other characters in the show, and never for good-hearted reasons. Usually it's done to falsely incriminate others.
This time, I have someone a little different in mind.
He does this in one of his earliest appearances on the show when he disguises himself as Spidey to rob a bank alongside other supervillains. This particular action also means that he's guilty of theft, too. Besides that, however, the Chameleon doesn't have a lot of crimes to his name. He was one of the more underutilized villains in the series, and that does help him get more lenient of a sentence than most other characters we've covered today. Even so, incrimination and theft are not crimes anyone would take lightly, and due to that, we're going to give Chameleon a decade behind bars. Chameleon might have a useful set of skills at his disposal, but sadly for him, none of those are going to be any help in getting him out of prison. Instead, he'll have to try something a bit different, being on his best behavior. Speaking of the Chameleon, let's take a look at one of his henchmen, the Master of Illusion himself, the menacing Mysterio. Once a special effects artist, Quentin Beck becomes a part of the Chameleon's criminal crew sometime afterward, only to go solo and don the identity of Mysterio after that.
Are we being punked? I hate that.
He steals equipment from places like Oscorp to create this character, making him guilty of both breaking and entering and theft right from his inception. Since it was also Quentin's technology that was used by the Chameleon to falsely incriminate Spider-Man, it only makes sense if we add that charge to his sheet as well. Mysterio could easily be charged with several other crimes, but luckily for him, many of his appearances in the show are little more than robots created to fool the police and Spidey. As such, we don't think it technically makes sense to charge him with those. Even without those offenses, however, Mysterio remains a danger to the people of New York and gets a more deserving 15 years in the doghouse from us. On one hand, that's not quite as bad of a sentence as other Spidey foes have gotten. On the other hand, no amount of robot clones is going to help Mysterio wriggle out of this mess. Also, this isn't part of the script, I just gotta say, Mysterio, best Spidey villain, easily. Fight me. Coming up next to the stand is the one, the only, at least in Marvel, Sandman. Originally a petty crook known as Flint Marko, the Sandman came into being after he was experimented on and given the ability of sand. It's better than it sounds. Unlike other villains in the show, Marko's only interested in money. He doesn't want to take over the world nor kill Spider-Man, but he wants to get his hands on as much cash as possible.
Flint Marko was a nobody, but everyone will know the name Sandman.
Because of that, it's not surprising that theft is the main thing we'll be charging Flint with. He also has broken out of jail on a few occasions throughout the show, and like the majority of characters we're looking at here, his encounters with Spider-Man make him guilty of attempted murder. Sandman is a dangerous and formidable member of Spidey's large cast of villains, but he has something many of them lack: a heart. After Spider-Man tries to stop him from robbing an oil tanker, an explosion breaks out and the two join forces to save the men aboard. For a moment, it even appears that Sandman has sacrificed himself to get them to safety. Though it doesn't absolve him of his crimes, it's something that makes him a far better person than most of his contemporaries. Be serious for a moment. Could you see Dr. Octopus or Mysterio doing something like that? I mean, Mysterio's the best, but he's got other things to do. Due to this notable moment of heroism, we're giving Flint Marko only 5 years behind bars. We're also doing that because, if we're being honest, how would Sandman even fare in a jail cell? Couldn't he just turn into sand and sneak out through the bars? I feel like we need to take some, precautionary measures here. Whether it's his heart or his odd abilities, Sandman can take solace in the fact that he'll fare much better from the justice system than most of Spidey's opponents will. It's time we talk about Tombstone's right-hand man, Hammerhead. A member of his organized crime family, Hammerhead often acts as the enforcer for many of Tombstone's criminal plans. Besides being involved with organized crime, he's also guilty of attempted murder and assault on account of his battles with Spider-Man. As a villain of the Arachnid Kid, it kinda comes with the territory at this point. His last notable offense in the series is conspiracy.
See, boss, it's good you brung me. You need me watching your back.
He betrays Tombstone right amid a war with the other crime lords of New York, choosing to ally himself with the Green Goblin in the conflict. As his character is so closely intertwined with Tombstone's, we think it would be most appropriate for Hammerhead to be given a sentence comparable to his. However, if we compare the character's crimes, we feel Hammerhead is actually the more despicable of the two. Tombstone takes a secretive approach to crime and is even willing to work alongside Spider-Man if the need arises. Hammerhead, on the other hand, is far more blatant in his evil doings and straight up betrays Tombstone. You know how bad you've got to be to betray him, of all characters? Due to this, Hammerhead will be spending the next 25 years in prison. To be fair, Hammerhead wanted to be the big crime lord of New York City. It looks like he got exactly what he wanted, if you ask us. Up next is the dangerous, albeit dim-witted, Rhino. Another one of Norman's experiments gone wrong. The Rhino, like Sandman, was a small-time crook with his eyes focused on theft and little else. After his transformation into the Rhino, however, he quickly became one of Spidey's most formidable foes. His encounters with the superpowered high schooler make him guilty of both assault as well as attempted murder. He's also guilty of jailbreak for when he breaks out with other villains, creating the Sinister Six in the process. Last but certainly not least, if there's one thing that follows Rhino anywhere and everywhere, it's vandalism. When he's on the prowl, you can bet your bottom dollar that the streets are going to look anything but safe. On account of these 5 charges, we sentence the Rhino to 25 years in prison, just like Hammerhead before him. Like his Animal Kingdom counterpart, Rhino will be spending a long time in captivity, although he might have it worse. We're certain the food rhinos eat in zoos isn't anywhere near as bad as prison food, at least. Joining the likes of Rhino and the Vulture as another animal-themed villain, the next face to go on trial is Dr. Kurt Connors, better known as the Lizard. A scientist looking to use the DNA of a lizard to regrow his lost arm. His experiment goes wrong, big surprise, turning him into a ferocious and monstrous man-sized reptile. After the transformation, Lizard wreaks havoc all across New York, making him guilty of vandalism. He even tries to eat a woman at one point, which we'll go ahead and count as attempted murder. As Spider-Man tries to stop him, he continues to fight against him, adding an assault charge to his list of crimes. That does it for Lizard's criminal offenses, so I guess it's time to sentence him. However, when it comes to Dr. Connors, there comes a question about how do we actually try him. Remember, it was the Lizard who did all these crimes, not Connors. For his part, Kurt seems remorseful for everything his experiments end up causing. It also doesn't seem like Connors is ever in control at all when in the Lizard form, honestly being more akin to a victim than a perpetrator. Because of Connors' feelings toward the Lizard and a lack of agency in the crimes committed by the Lizard, we've decided to give this doctor our first and only pardon of the day. Kurt Connors really does seem like a person who is deeply sorry for every crime the Lizard's committed. Between that and the fact that the Lizard doesn't reappear in future episodes, it seems safe to say that this is one of the characters who did turn over a new leaf. If only some of the others here could have done similarly. We're nearing the end of sentencing Spidey's villains, and up next is a most electrifying one. Who else but Electro? An electrician who falls into a vat of eels, Electro is the last member of the Sinister Six we'll be covering today, and he's arguably one of the most dangerous. Blaming his boss, Kurt Connors, for his new condition, he attempts to kill both him and the Wallcrawler shortly after acquiring his powers.
Where's Connors?
Later on, he helps break several villains out of jail, leading to the birth of the Sinister Six. Lastly, much like the Rhino, destruction seems to follow Electro every time he's up to no good, meaning that we can go ahead and charge him with vandalism.
Told you, it's Electro.
Overall, Electro, like most of the other members of the Sinister Six, is one who we don't feel all too comfortable letting roam around free. Like a lot of them, he gets 20 years of prison time. If there's anything optimistic we can say about his sentence, it's that it's definitely not as bad as what the next two characters will be getting. Our second to last villain to put on trial today is the ever infamous Venom! Not Eddie Brock nor Peter Parker, mind you, but the Venom symbiote itself. Remember, the symbiote feeds on the negative energies of its host and manipulates them into doing whatever it wants. It makes the most sense to try the symbiote rather than any of its hosts. So right from the get-go, we can accuse the symbiote of possession, as that is exactly what it does to both Peter and Brock.
This alien, it's some kind of symbiote.
The Venom symbiote is quite the stalker as well. Whenever it's without a host, it quickly sets its sights on a new one and will pursue them until they have amalgamated. It's also guilty of assault in addition to the prior two charges. Not only is it assaulting its host by feeding on them, but when it finds a new host, it'll violently attach itself to them. The Venom symbiote is a truly toxic being, and it's toxic to anyone it encounters. It's something nobody should have to encounter, and to ensure that, we've decided to give it the death sentence. Of course, there are only two reliable ways to destroy the symbiote, fire and sound. Either way you slice it, the symbiote's gonna be in for a rough one. Finally, we've reached the last villain, and who else could it be other than the show's primary villain, the Green Goblin? Whether he's dressed up in a Halloween costume or simply Oscorp CEO Norman Osborn, this is one character who's always up to no good. As Norman, he's first and foremost far from an ideal father. He has little interest in the life of his son Harry, and even falsely incriminates him as the Goblin to keep himself from going to prison. So that's child abuse, child endangerment, and incrimination all in one nice neat package. And that's all directed at his own son. As you can guess, Norman isn't any better towards others. He embezzles Toombs' flying technology, leading directly to the creation of the Vulture. Of course, Norman's crimes mostly stem from his alter ego, the Green Goblin. As the show progresses, he becomes more involved in the organized crimes of New York, making him guilty of conspiring and, rather obviously, organized crime. When he's wreaking havoc in the city, he commits many acts of terrorism, and he nearly commits murder in his battles against Spidey and the other crime lords in New York. Green Goblin is easily Spidey's most ruthless villain, as evidenced by his lengthy list of charges.
Guilty. Guilty.
With so many offenses tied to his name, the only sentence that seems appropriate for Osborn is the death sentence. Whether it's carried out via the electric chair, or through lethal injection, or through hanging, doesn't matter to me, I'm not in charge of it. We can't imagine it being a pleasant end, even to a superpowered being like the Goblin. That being said, Norman excels at cheating death, so maybe he'd have something planned for this too.
It's a hell of a freaking light show, you're gonna love this.
From their excellent storytelling to the unparalleled animation style, the Spiderverse movies are a spectacle that shouldn't be missed by fans of Spider-Man or animation in general. But what's a cast of superheroes without the villains? I'm Kyle with Wicked Binge, and we want you to join us as we travel into and across the Spider-Verse to sentence Spider-Verse saga villains for their crimes. We want to preface this with a big spoiler warning for the Spider-Verse movies, specifically Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Let's start off with the first villain given a proper introduction in the saga, the Green Goblin. Looking quite different from his most iconic appearances in the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies, Norman Osborn has clearly been working out. Or rather, some kind of experiments have been working out because there's no way those gains are natural. As one of many villains working under Kingpin, Green Goblin is sent to defeat Spider-Man and ensure that the Super Collider is able to do its dimension-connecting work. Although Green Goblin is an underling of Kingpin's, this doesn't make him innocent. entrapment or constitute blackmail. He clearly holds a grudge against Spider-Man, and despite Kingpin's orders not to kill him by exposing him to the Super Collider's energy, he disobeys this with intent to kill him for his own pleasure. We can undoubtedly charge Green Goblin with terrorism, but the sentence for this varies depending upon the nature of the act. For Green Goblin, we could summarize his terrorism with destruction of property and attempted murder, which respectively yields sentences of up to 30 and 20 years. Tack on the fact that he was a willing ally to Kingpin, and if he were still alive in this universe, we would sentence Green Goblin to 50 years in prison. Hopefully we can find a cell big enough to hold him. Green Goblin might just be the biggest of Kingpin's underlings, but he's not the most notable. Enter Tombstone. He's Kingpin's most trusted associate, acting as his right-hand man. Literally, he's almost always seen standing right by Kingpin, acting as a bodyguard of sorts. He's not even adverse to intimidating his allies, shown when he holds Liv at gunpoint until Kingpin approves of him letting her go. Tombstone is intensely loyal to Kingpin, and won't hesitate to follow his orders at any time, no matter who it requires killing or harming, clearly shown by his lack of remorse for breaking into Aunt May's house and destroying her belongings. This, in turn, makes Tombstone perhaps the most heavily responsible for Kingpin's evil deeds, excluding Kingpin himself, of course. He's guilty of attempted murder, destruction of property, and assault, all under the umbrella of terrorism. Given his extreme loyalty to Kingpin on top of this, making for no hesitation to follow any of his orders, Tombstone would most likely be getting life in prison. But given his stoic, calm personality, we'd actually say it's possible that he could get his sentence reduced with good behavior. On the other hand, his loyalty to Kingpin might just make this null and void, so we'll compromise and give Tombstone 50 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 20. It's okay, Tombstone. Either way, you're at least safe from Aunt May's bat. Speaking of, Tombstone wasn't the only one who showed up to that impromptu battle at Aunt May's. We hope you aren't too bugged by seeing Scorpion on our list. Like Tombstone, he's a loyal servant to Kingpin and doesn't mind following any of his orders, however brutal they may be, and regardless of whether or not they involve innocents. Honestly, what can we say about the guy in terms of his crimes? Attempted murder? Check. Terrorism? Check. Aiding and abetting? Check. Destruction of a child's property and attempting to murder that child as well? Yeah, that's new. But really, he's basically in the same boat as Tombstone, and we're sentencing him to 50 years with possibility of parole after 30. Let's quickly move on to Across the Spider-Verse to talk about the last minor antagonist, Vulture. Little is known about Vulture, as he's only present in the opening of the sequel as the first villain, fighting against Spider-Gwen, Spider-Woman, and Spider-Man 2099. The only thing we can surely say about this Vulture is that he broke into a museum, caused destruction of expensive property, and attempted murder. Since we don't know anything more, we'll give Vulture a sentence of 20 years. With that said, we move on to the more major villains in the Spider-Verse, and let us assure you they're all pretty bad. Starting with Dr. Olivia Octavius, but you might know her better by the name her enemies use for her, Doc Ock. She's the CEO of Alchemax, a large company assisting Kingpin in his endeavors to use the Super Collider to bring back alternate versions of his family, who were tragically killed in a car crash. At first glance, she seems quite charming, a bit socially awkward, but she's nice enough and seems to be working hard in her field. But when Spider-Man tries to turn on the charm with her, he finds out her true identity the hard way, gleefully telling him that, with him being in the wrong dimension, he'll be ruthlessly torn apart, and she can't wait to see it.
Do you know how painful that would be, Peter Parker? Can't wait to watch.
Doc Ock is sadistic and ruthless. She has no issue using her massive company and genius-level intelligence for the sake of evil. When it comes to Spider-Man, she even seems to take pleasure in it and wants to destroy every version of him that she can. Her crimes go beyond anyone else we've seen so far. She's willingly providing aid and resources to Kingpin, whose plan will tear apart the fabric of the universe itself. On top of this, she's likely ordering her employees to do the same, as the Spot reveals that he was the guy who had the bagel thrown at him in the first movie, and he had access to the Super Collider's power too. She's guilty of every crime we can attribute to Tombstone or Scorpion, and then some. She isn't just pure evil, she's crazy, and for the sake of herself and others, we sentence her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Moving on to the Prowler. Uncle Aaron might be a great uncle who cares deeply for his nephew Miles, but he's also an associate of the Kingpin. In the case of the Spider-Verse movies, the reasoning behind this is unknown. From his brother Jefferson's description of him, we can reason that he's a bit of a slacker, but that doesn't explain why he's an outright villain working for Kingpin. But even if he had a sympathetic reason, he's still a murderer and an associate of Kingpin. He has no hesitation to kill anyone, including children, as at one point he tells Kingpin he'll find the kid and kill him.
The kid's out there. I'll find them.
In his last moments, he spares Miles' life and is shot by Kingpin, showing that he's at least not an entirely bad guy. Had he survived somehow, it's possible that his police officer brother might have put in a good word for him. It's unknown just how many the Prowler has killed, if any so far, but we have to assume he's at least killed some, since he was infamous enough to be hired by Kingpin, given his brother's potential connections, and since he's by far the most sympathetic of the villains on our list. We'll be generous and give him a sentence of 25 years in prison, just above New York's minimum murder sentence of 15 years. Okay, we've mentioned him in passing enough. It's time to talk about the big man on campus, Kingpin. Man, where do we even start with this guy? As the main villain of Into the Spider-Verse, he's at the core of every other villain's actions therein, whether it's characters like Vulture managing to escape from their home universe, his many underlings, or even helping develop the power that made the Spot who he is today. Kingpin is no joke.
It's not always about the money, Spider-Man.
We also know that he kills the Peter Parker of Miles' universe, kills the Prowler when he refuses to take Miles out, and is at the center of a plan that could have destroyed the entire world. We won't deny that we feel some sympathy for Kingpin, given his pain at losing his family. Nonetheless, that doesn't excuse his horrific crimes, especially in the context of a court of law. There's no doubt that Kingpin gets life in prison without the possibility of parole. You might be tempted to not take the next villain all too seriously, but trust us when we say that the Spot is a force to be reckoned with. He might be considered one of Spider-Man's joke villains, but as the main antagonist of Across the Spider-Verse, he proves that joke villains get tired of being laughed at. We first see him stealing from an ATM, which could constitute a hefty fine of up to $250,000 and up to 20 years in federal prison. But honestly, that's barely even worth mentioning considering the other crimes he commits. The Spot uses the resources of Alchemax to harness the terrible power that gave him his portal-producing powers, to become even more powerful, able to travel across dimensions as he pleases.
See you back home, Spider-Man.
So just off the top of our head, we have unethical experimentation, given that he worked under Doc Ock to help Kingpin, terrorism, destruction of property, attempted mass murder, mass destruction, and that's still probably leaving quite a few out. Given the imminent danger that Spot poses to all life, if he were somehow captured and brought to trial, this is a rare case where we have to say the death penalty is in order. So the only spot that he'll be getting is a spot in the electric chair. Finishing off our list, we have a character who might be a bit controversial, as while he's one of the main antagonists of Across the Spider-Verse, he's more of an anti-hero than an outright villain. Nonetheless, we feel we have to mention Miguel O'Hara, aka Spider-Man 2099. He's not just Spider-Man, he's a werewolf and a vampire, or something. As stoic as it gets, O'Hara is in charge of the Spider-Verse, making sure everything runs the way it's supposed to. After changing the canon of a universe a long time ago, he realized just how dangerous it was, and how much destruction it could cause, so he took it all upon himself. On a base level, he's definitely more of a force of good, trying his best to keep the universe from falling out of whack and ending countless lives. But there are some moments that cast him into a more morally gray light. He resists arrest in the first fight of the film. That could be 6 months in county jail, so in this dimension, he probably wouldn't get too much more than that. Maybe nothing once police were made aware of the full context. However, if police were able to look at his actions as a whole, there's also O'Hara's attempts to kidnap Miles Morales to ensure his plan to let the canon of his dimension play out comes to fruition, which, although well-intentioned in the big picture, is still kidnapping a child, which could definitely land him a very hefty sentence. So we'll say that he ends up getting 2 years in prison before the police see that he was actually trying to save the universe, and promptly let him do his thing.
Look at me! You did this to me!
With great power comes great responsibility, but it also comes with allies, enemies, friendships, family, and maybe even a romance or two. Basically, Spider-Man tends to be defined by his relationships, and this newest Spider-Man movie is no exception. So let's go over these relationships. I'm Kyle with Wicked Binge, and these are Across the Spider-Verse relationships, healthy to toxic. And also, major spoilers ahead for both Spider-Verse films. As always, we'll be starting with the healthiest relationship and working our way down to the most toxic. These relationships are the healthy. For this film's gold star example of a healthy relationship, we have Jefferson and Rio Morales, Miles' parents. It's always nice to see an animated couple, especially a pair of animated parents, who aren't constantly bickering or who are seen as unhappy in their marriage. While they do have their moments of disagreement, these two tend to be on the same page for the most part when it comes to parenting. Although their main focus is obviously on Miles, these two still obviously care about each other a lot, with Rio especially being shown supporting her husband and wanting to celebrate his promotion to captain. There aren't really any truly negative moments between these two, as even in those rare moments when they're in disagreement, they still try to communicate and have a discussion instead of just arguing, which is really nice to see. Keeping within the Morales family, the silver medal of healthiness has to go to the relationship between Miles and his parents. Now, this may seem a bit surprising to some, since these three are shown arguing a fairly decent amount in the first half of the movie. However, not only does it all come from a place of love and concern, but Miles' parents never cross that line of becoming too overbearing or stern, nor does Miles ever become too disrespectful or take his parents' love for granted. They all love each other so much, and they just want to try and be there for each other, even if this isn't always possible. Rio's speech to Miles before she tells him to go after Gwen is pretty much the epitome of this. While he still doesn't know Miles' secret identity, it's still great seeing Jefferson actually trying to work with Spider-Man and even opening up to him a bit, showing how much these two have gotten better at communicating since the first film, even when Miles still has to keep some secrets. Speaking of which, even after the big blow-up at Jefferson's party that results in Miles getting grounded, he and Rio are still shown wanting to talk with Miles, and more importantly, listen to him, once things have cooled down a bit. Again, it's just an example of a familial relationship still being loving and healthy, even if it's not always picture perfect. For our bronze medal of healthiness, we have the friendship between Gwen and the other Spider people, namely Spider-Man India and Spider-Punk. In terms of the Spider Society as a whole, Gwen actually manages to fit in pretty well, and this is best exemplified by her actions with Spider-Man India and Spider-Punk. They all work together incredibly well, and when it comes to Spider-Punk specifically, not only does Hobie let Gwen crash in his dimension whenever she needs a break, but he also doesn't mind too much when she borrows his things and just always seems to have her back. Judging by how well they get along, it's nice to see that Gwen was indeed able to make some new friends on her Spider Society missions, even if they couldn't fully replace her best friend. But while they end up having a bit more conflict due to Gwen's new Spider Society duties, the relationship between her and Miles is still an incredibly strong one. Now, we do have to mention the slight romantic edge these two have, with Miles obviously crushing on Gwen and Gwen being a bit more unsure but still liking Miles a lot. But thankfully, the hints at romance never really get in the way of their friendship, allowing these two to still support each other fully and have each other's backs both in and out of costume. Miles also never pushes Gwen to anything romantic, simply stating that it could be possible, but never being truly forceful about it. Really, the only wrinkle in their relationship is Gwen not being completely honest with Miles, bound by both her Spider Society mission and her own feelings of not knowing how to break the truth to him. However, even if it takes her a bit to fully start to stand up against O'Hara, the end of the film shows us that she's indeed willing to go to the ends of the multiverse for her best friend and his happiness. Speaking of Miles, his friendship with Hobie was a very pleasant and welcome surprise. Prior to the film's premiere, sites were reporting that it would have a bit of a love triangle between Miles, Gwen, and Spider-Punk, which had quite a few fans worried. And yes, there is a small moment where Miles is a bit concerned and a bit jealous at how close Hobie and Gwen seem to be, as well as how cool Hobie is. But that's just it. It's only a moment. Outside of that, Hobie and Miles get along incredibly well. Although Miles may not always understand Hobie's purposefully contradictory and anti-authority attitude, Hobie seems to respect Miles quite a bit and supports him wanting to try to break canon. This extends to Hobie helping Miles break out of Spider Society containment, quitting on the spot when he's given the orders to chase Miles down, and even making Gwen a homemade dimension-hopping watch so that she can rescue Miles. In addition to all the new Spider people Miles got to meet, we really liked seeing that the more familiar relationship between him and Peter B is still fairly positive. From the moment these two see each other again, Gwen. They're absolutely thrilled and don't hesitate to give each other a big hug. Peter B obviously still has a huge soft spot for Miles, telling him point blank that he only has his daughter because Miles gave him the courage to be a parent. Even when Peter B is forced to try and catch Miles for the sake of the Spider-Verse, he tries to do it in the most civil and calmest way possible, so he doesn't hurt him. Although he does end up accidentally leading the other Spider people to their location during the big chase scene. At some points, it even seems like Peter B is cheering Miles on, and of course, he chooses to help rescue Miles from Universe 42 at the end of the film. As for Miles, while Peter B's dishonesty and him still sometimes seeing him as a kid can be a bit frustrating, Peter B is still one of the Spider people that Miles seems to trust the most, and we don't think that's going to change anytime soon. But what's better than seeing Peter B still try to be a good mentor? How about him as a dad? Finishing off the healthy tier is the relationship between Peter B and his toddler daughter, Mayday. While it can't be easy looking after a spider-powered toddler, Peter B seems to be taking it in stride. He's incredibly playful and affectionate towards Mayday, doing his best to keep her safe and encouraging her own playfulness. Really, the only caveat to this otherwise sweet relationship is, well, Peter, should you really be taking a baby on dangerous missions with you? Just based off this, it seems like Peter B may still have a bit more to learn about being a responsible parent. But that still doesn't stop him from being an overall good dad, judging by how much Mayday loves him. With the healthy section wrapped up, we move into relationships that have some pretty noticeable rough patches, but still manage to avoid complete toxicity. Welcome to the gray area. Starting off, let's take a look at the heads of the Spider Society. Miguel O'Hara, aka Spider-Man 2099, and Spider-Woman Jessica Drew. In terms of teammates, these two are for the most part on the same page. They fight together well, and they're both fairly dedicated to the mission of protecting the Spider-Verse, even if O'Hara is perhaps a little more dedicated than Jessica, although Jessica will sometimes try to get O'Hara to compromise or be sympathetic, such as when she successfully convinces him to allow Gwen onto the team. She'll still follow his lead when it comes to the bigger things, even if she doesn't necessarily fully agree with the things that the Spider Society has to do. You have to wonder if Jessica is following O'Hara's lead out of respect and having similar beliefs, or simply because he's the one in charge. We do see her start to defy O'Hara at the end of the film when she lets Gwen go, but as for whether or not she'll fully switch sides, only time will tell. Now let's talk about another mentor and student relationship, this being the one between Jessica Drew and Gwen Stacy. As we said, Jessica looks out for Gwen quite a bit, understanding both her friendship with Miles as well as her situation with her father. She comforts Gwen after Gwen nearly gets arrested, and while she has her moments of being stern with Gwen, Jessica will still look out for her and give her a chance to correct her mistakes, essentially protecting her from O'Hara and his obvious one strike and you're out mindset. Even after things go very wrong, she still gives Gwen a chance to go save her friend. As for Gwen, while she definitely seems to admire and respect Jessica a ton, being grateful for all that Jessica has managed to teach her as a mentor, Gwen still isn't willing to completely follow orders without arguing. While this is perhaps a good thing considering all that the Spider Society is willing to do for the sake of keeping to canon, it does drive a bit of a wedge between the two Spider-Women. Unfortunately, Gwen's relationship with her father, Captain George Stacy, can have just as much friction, if not more so. It can't be easy being a superhero when you know that not only is your father trying to arrest you, but he also sees you as a murderer. This puts quite a bit of tension between Gwen and George, both before and after her secret identity is revealed. While he may still care about her, George struggles a lot when he first learns the truth, to the point of still trying to arrest her. Thankfully, after Gwen unwillingly returns from her multiverse adventures, George ends up deciding to quit his position as police captain so that he isn't forced to arrest Gwen himself. For as much as they may argue, these two still love each other deeply, with George calling Gwen the best thing that's ever happened to him, being more willing to trust and support her when she has to leave again. It's a happy ending to what otherwise could have been a tragedy, and it's certainly a subversion we could use more of. Finally, with the gray area wrapped up, we get to the truly toxic relationships of the Spider-Verse, the ones that tend to lean more on feelings of anger, hatred, and betrayal than love. Taking the bronze medal of toxicity is the attempted alliance between Gwen Stacy and Miguel O'Hara. While they may have worked together well when it came to taking down the Vulture, these two didn't exactly get off on the right foot because of her connection to Miles. O'Hara was adamant that he didn't want her in his spider society, and while he was eventually able to compromise on this front, he still seemed to constantly view her as a liability. Gwen, meanwhile, tried to do her best to follow orders so that she wouldn't get sent home. But even when she tried to fight for the sake of the Spiderverse and the canon, Gwen wasn't afraid to stand up to O'Hara whenever he crossed the line with her or Miles. This is pushed to the absolute brink by the end of the film, leading to O'Hara forcing Gwen out of the society and back to her own dimension, prompting Gwen to question if he's really a good guy. Obviously, these two are going to have quite a bit to discuss in the third film, considering Gwen's rescue mission, probably more to fight over too. For our silver medal of toxicity, we have to give it to Miles and Miguel O'Hara. Much like with O'Hara and Gwen, him and Miles don't seem to get along at all, with this primarily being due to O'Hara's insistence at following the canon. Miles, meanwhile, keeps insisting that he can save both his father and the universe as a whole, refusing to listen to O'Hara or anyone else telling him that he's wrong. This leads to a huge blowout, where he essentially got O'Hara taking out all of his frustration and trauma on Miles for being an anomaly like how O'Hara himself was, being incredibly hostile and telling him, among other cruel things, that Miles is the reason why his universe's original Spider-Man died. Overall, these two are just a classic case of opposing mindsets and ideologies that refuse to bend to one another, leading to quite a few explosions. At this point in the story, where O'Hara is willing to not only let Jefferson die, but also make sure it happens, and Miles being willing to do anything to stop him, may not even be possible for these two to form any sort of alliance, much less a full-on friendship. Finally, the gold medal of toxicity is going to the antagonistic relationship between Miles and the Spot. These two actually have a pretty interesting relationship, all things considered, even if it starts off as incredibly one-sided. Believing that Miles is responsible for the transformation that pushed him into a life of crime, the Spot wants nothing more than to be his nemesis. Miles, meanwhile, doesn't even know who Spot is, and originally just views Spot as someone who barely manages to be a villain of the week, not taking him very seriously as he's fighting him and even laughing at him and his strange powers during their interactions in the bodega. Needless to say, this doesn't exactly help matters, and once Spot fully has Miles' attention, he makes it clear that he wants nothing more than to ruin Miles' life, just like how Miles ruined his. Or at least, that's how he views it. Just seeing how deeply Spot seems to absolutely hate Miles, a 15-year-old kid who never meant to hurt him, is actually kind of shocking and a bit terrifying at times, though Miles does try to talk him down and give him some respect when they're both in Mobatten. It's too little too late, with Spot being firm in his goals of killing Miles' father. Until that goal changes, and until these two are able to see eye to eye, enough for Spot to back down, these semi-one-sided arch-nemesises will remain the most toxic relationship in the film series.
This is Miles, and he's gonna save the multiverse.
Yeah, man.
Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse has taken the world by storm. The sensational animation and storytelling work together to make this movie utterly brilliant, much like many of its characters. I'm Kyle with Wicked Binge, and this is Spider-Verse Saga characters, dumb to brilliant. First off, spoilers ahead. Now, to be honest, there aren't really any characters who we see as outright dumb in these movies, but we do want to start with a couple who are a bit of a mixed bag. So I guess technically the dumbest characters would actually be Tombstone and Scorpion. These two are both minor antagonists in the first movie, working under Kingpin. The main difference in their roles is that Tombstone is trusted even more closely than Scorpion, acting as his right-hand man and personal bodyguard. There's not much to say about them, save for the fact that they're good bodyguards with pretty strong senses. But while this does make them good allies, it doesn't make them particularly smart in comparison to others. With that said, we now move into our more well-rounded characters in the brains department. These characters are pretty smart. To kick this section off, we move from villains to heroes, and what's more heroic than loving parents? Enter Jefferson Davis and Rio Morales. These two are the two most regular people in the cast. Rio, Miles' mother, is very sensitive to her son's needs, often being the voice of reason to his overbearing father.
For years I've been taking care of this little boy.
But that's not to discredit soon-to-be Captain Jefferson, though. This tough-as-nails police officer may have a short fuse, but he's a well-put-together man who can be summed up as a well-meaning, albeit flawed, father who's trying his best. These two aren't anything crazy in terms of intellect, but they are well-rounded. Next up, we have Spider-Man India, one of the new additions to the Spider-Verse ensemble cast. He definitely puts the friendly in friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. He's fairly resourceful, using his web slingers as grappling hooks of sorts, and is always prepared to save people in danger. danger, though it is worth mentioning that he's a bit more clumsy and scatterbrained, as he is the least experienced of the prominent spider people. Next, we have the most animated character of all. He frolics, he dances, he does things with his pantses. He's Peter Porker, aka Spider-Ham. Spider-Ham is a skillful fighter who has all the resources you would expect from an adorably mischievous cartoon character, from smoothly animated dodges to gigantic mallets that apparently fit in your pocket. Spider-Ham is a good help to the team.
I just washed my hands, that's why they're wet.
And a compassionate person overall, even having one of the most memorable lines in the movie. Quote, "Miles, the hardest thing about this job is, you can't always save everybody," which are profound words. We're not quite at the genius level yet, but we're nonetheless moving into a new tier of intelligence, these characters being exceptionally smart. We'll be first to acknowledge that placing Miles Morales this low is probably controversial. It probably wouldn't be a surprise to hear that Miles isn't the smartest character in the Spider-Verse, but he still shows some pretty impressive feats of intelligence. He has good battle senses, is quick-witted, has excellent artistic talent, and is actually very academically gifted. We see through his interactions with teachers and other staff members at his school that the only reason his grades aren't higher is his tendency to miss class for hero work, or even outright trying to fail on one occasion. He's also sharp as a tack, managing to lure all the spider people to him so he can escape from Spider-Man 2099 effectively. That said, being a kid, his naive nature loses him some points. One could say that Miles is a bit overly optimistic, tending to want to have his cake and to eat it too. Which brings us to Spider-Gwen. Upgraded from a major supporting character to a deuteragonist in Across the Spider-Verse, Gwen is a kind, if somewhat reserved, young Spider-Woman. Like Miles, she has no shortage of book smarts or street smarts. She uses the connections she makes to help in her endeavors, one example being the final scene of Across the Spider-Verse, in which she's gathered multiple spider people to help save Miles, who's trapped on Earth 42. We give her a very slight upper hand over Miles in terms of smarts, simply because she's had more time under Spider-Woman in Spider-Man 2099 to learn the ins and outs of the Spider-Verse, and is a bit less naive than her buddy Miles. Moving on, next we have Spider-Man Noir, a 1950s private eye detective. Spider-Man Noir is a comic relief hero who joins Miles alongside Gwen, Spider-Ham, and Penny Parker in the movie's second act. Being a detective, we can assume Noir has a good amount of book smarts, as well as street smarts. He's also a fairly skilled fighter and usually keeps a cool head. What keeps him from being any higher is the fact that he's a bit tactless sometimes. When Miles is distressed over finding out that his uncle is the Prowler, he insensitively calls it a, quote, hardcore origin story. Speaking of which, let's explain why we've allowed the Prowler, aka Uncle Aaron, such a high spot on this list. Uncle Aaron initially seems like a nice guy, a bit of a slacker, graffiti artist, and a fantastic uncle to his nephew Miles. But he's living a pretty dark double life as the bounty hunting supervillain known as the Prowler, and is on commission by Kingpin to kill Spider-Man. He's smart enough to constantly stay on Spider-Man's tail, using every resource at his disposal to get rid of him. He may not be a traditional intellectual genius, but as far as supervillains go, the Prowler is not the guy you want to be on the enemy list of. Like he said himself, he never quits. It might seem early, but we're now getting into the truly brilliant characters. These are the geniuses. All of the spider people are cool on some level, but it's hard to outcool Spider-Punk. Also known as Hobie, Spider-Punk is another new addition to the core spider people. Don't let the punk title fool you. Hobie isn't just a wannabe anarchist. He's, well, a legit anarchist. He has impressive intuition, always seeing through to the core of people's issues, being one of the only ones who questions O'Hara's assertion that canon events must play out in their entirety. He also has great foresight and technical smarts, not only being able to build one of the watches worn by spider people, but even foreseeing the fact that Gwen might need one in the future. We've talked about plenty of characters who aren't traditional geniuses in the book smart sense, but in Hobie's case, his street smarts and fantastic intuition are enough to give him a spot in our genius tier. Any anime fans in the chat? If so, you'll feel right at home with our next entry, Penny Parker. She might be adorable, but don't let that fool you, as she doesn't fool around. She's able to effortlessly control her father's robot, which, given the scenes we see her doing so in, looks pretty darn complicated. We see at the end of the movie that she's able to repair it when it's broken as well, with a bit of help from her little spider buddy, of course. Her intellectual equality with the other spider people is quite impressive when you consider the fact that she's only 14 years old, making her not only the youngest of the geniuses, but the youngest character on this entire list. Which brings us to Kingpin. He's the underground ruler of New York City. Sure, he's not solving the greatest mysteries of science itself, but he's an utterly brilliant supervillain businessman.
What are you waiting for? Finish it.
He has connections with numerous supervillains, bounty hunters, and companies, and uses them to further his goal of completing the Super Collider to find alternate universe versions of his family, all the while keeping up appearances as a friendly businessman in public. Also notable is the fact that he's able to understand Alchemex's work on the Super Collider. Next, we have Jessica Drew, who eagerly awaits bringing her child into the world. Jessica Drew, or Spider-Woman, is known for her motorcycle skills and heavy influence in Spider Society. She oversees many other Spider people and helps them out, showing excellent time management and people skills. She's also compassionate, insisting on taking Gwen under her wing so she won't be alone. Though there is one flaw that we can point out. At one point, she calls Peter B. Parker a bad mentor, and that's clearly BS. Even though he wasn't interested in mentoring Miles from the get-go due to his struggles, he more than made up for it with his subsequent actions. For one thing, Peter is a scientific genius. He developed much of his own gear himself, as well as some web shooters for his little daughter, Mayday. He also has no reservations about making another goober to shut down the Super Collider. On top of this scientific intellect, he has good emotional intelligence as well, offering Miles a lot of advice and doing his best to support him and keep him safe, even if that means pointing out when he isn't quite ready sometimes. Peter is an indisputable and iconic genius, with great battle senses and extensive scientific knowledge, which leads us into our top 3, all of whom we've placed into their own category, because these characters are super geniuses. So tell us, can you spot the bronze medal of brains? Get it? Because it's the Spot. Don't let his joke villain vibe fool you. The Spot was once a scientist at Alchemax, which shows that he's always been very smart, able to not only comprehend the power of the Super Collider, but help develop it and even replicate it to enhance his mutant power. He wants revenge on Miles for throwing a bagel at him and causing him to become the Spot indirectly, taking everything from him. With his own pseudo Super Collider, he manages to start tearing apart the fabric of the universe itself. Being able to harness that power on his own is quite the intellectual feat, and for a usual joke villain, he's one of the biggest threats the Spider-Verse has seen yet. But as intelligent as the Spot is, our next entry has the upper hand, or 6 actually. Dr. Olivia Octavius, aka Doc Ock, a sadistic scientist and the CEO of Alchemax. It likely requires little explanation as to why she's so high. She's the one in charge of developing the Super Collider, commissioned by Kingpin, allowing spider people from alternate dimensions to cross over. Her scientific genius needs no introduction, but her people skills are equally impressive. She manages to successfully pull off the facade of a fun, dorky scientist girl to get Peter to let his guard down, only to reveal her sadistic intentions to watch him die a horrific death once he's powerless to stop it. Now, call it recency bias if you will, but our gold medal for brains has to go to Across the Spider-Verse's anti-hero edition, Miguel O'Hara, aka Spider-Man 2099. We're not going to act like it was an easy decision either. All of the characters in the genius category are, well, geniuses, especially the last few. But Miguel O'Hara has all the feats of the last few and then some. O'Hara is the founder and leader of the Spider Society, in which spider people come together and are united to ensure that each one goes about the way they're intended to. Sometimes this means making hard choices, but O'Hara sees the big picture of the entire Spider-Verse for the sake of ensuring that each universe is safe from harm as much as possible. He's practically omnipotent compared to other characters. He's highly respected among spider people, who obey his commands with mostly no question, and he's able to utilize interdimensional technology to assign different spiders to different areas to help out, and keep them from glitching in said dimensions. His moral nature is highly debatable, but in our eyes, he is the smartest character we've seen in the Spider-Verse.
You say the fate of the multiverse,
and my brain dies.
We started off going into the Spider-Verse, and just recently we were finally able to swing into theaters and travel across the Spider-Verse. So what's the next step? Well, naturally, it's going beyond the Spider-Verse. And the best part is that we have less than a year to wait, but that also means that we've only got so much time to think about what's going to happen. I'm Kyle with Wicked Binge, and today we're going to go across the Spider-Verse fandom to discuss some Beyond the Spider-Verse predictions we love and hate. Now, it should go without saying, but major spoilers for both Spider-Verse movies, specifically Across the Spider-Verse, which just came out, and feel free to give your own predictions in the comments section below. First up, this theory suggests a transition from one genre to another, that Beyond the Spider-Verse will actually be live action. We sourced this prediction from Reddit user CherryIntelligent856, who predicts that Miles will travel to a live action universe and stay there for most or part of the film. While we understand the market for a live action Miles Morales movie, and mean no disrespect for anyone who wants to to see this, but we gotta say we hate this prediction. One of the best parts of the Spider-Verse saga is its incredibly fluent, vividly colorful, and highly stylized animation. To take away or even reduce it would be to remove the heart of what makes these movies so special. So while we're not opposed to maybe a small live-action aspect, which could actually be kinda cool or funny, we're hoping that Miles' Disney reboot arc doesn't come to fruition in the Spider-Verse movies. Okay, now we're getting into major spoiler territory. Watching this video isn't a canon event, so feel free to save it for later if you need. Speaking of, what if there's no death needed? One of the greatest conflicts of Across the Spider-Verse was the dilemma of certain canon events needing to happen in each Spider-Man's universe in order for them to not collapse. For Miles' universe, according to Spider-Man 2099, this means his father, soon-to-be police captain Jefferson Davis, being killed. Naturally, Miles doesn't want his father to be killed, but he also doesn't want the universe to collapse. A common suggestion among fans is that nobody really needs to die in Miles' universe. For one thing, Miles himself is an anomaly, so why would his story necessarily have to play out exactly like the canon would suggest? Not just that, but he's already lost his Uncle Aaron. This theory would basically mean that nobody else needs to die for Miles' universe to remain safe. We'll say we have mixed feelings about this prediction. Now, everybody loves a good happy ending, us included, but with that said, it would be a difficult way of concluding the story without feeling cliche. The last thing we want is for stakes to be low in the climactic third Spider-Verse entry, so while we would like to see it, we want to keep our minds open to heroic sacrifices and drama. On the note of sacrifices, let's remind ourselves that with great power comes great responsibility. Enter what we'll call the, quote, necessary sacrifices theory. Returning to Reddit, user Enraged Chinchilla asserts an interesting theory that completely opposes what we just discussed. In short, he claims that the canon events are crucial because of the impact they have on the spider people they're in. The losses of loved ones turn spider people into the heroes they need to be. Whether it's Uncle Ben's iconic words of "with great power comes great responsibility," or Spider-Gwen's loss of her best friend. The way these losses affect the superheroes is pivotal in the way they function. This theory therefore suggests that Miles will have to choose to let his father die for the sake of the universe, playing off the iconic phrase, he's responsible for making necessary sacrifices to protect those around him, however painful they may be. And to be honest, we like this theory. We hate to say that since we've grown fond of Jefferson, and to say we outright like a theory that involves him being allowed to die by his own son just doesn't feel right. But we have to think of it from a storytelling standpoint. The emotional impact of his death would be incredibly heavy, and what's more, maybe with him being an anomaly, the death will belong to someone we don't expect. Only time will tell, but as heartbreaking as it will surely be, we give this theory the upper hand. We understand where that theory comes from. Like that lady near the beginning of Across the Spider-Verse says, you can't have your cake and eat it too. Unless, that is, you have two cakes. Our final Reddit source theory comes from user PizzaTime2099, who observes an interesting bit of foreshadowing. Miles is trying to save his father and the universe at the same time, and going back to the start of the movie, he brings two cakes to his father's party and drops them on the way. We want to start out by saying that's an awesome observation. We really love this symbolism, and it could have harrowing implications. Could this be foreshadowing that Miles will lose both his universe and his father by trying to juggle both of them? This theory is incredibly dark, and if it came true, it would be an extremely morbid and depressing ending to a pretty fun series. On the other hand, any way you slice it, no pun intended, the symbolism is pretty brilliant. So we'll meet in the middle and say that we have mixed feelings on this prediction. Our fellow cartoon fans will love this next theory, undoubtedly. This is the Spidey's Spider-Verse debut theory. Quite possibly the most iconic Spider-Man out there is his iteration in the 90s cartoon Spider-Man the Animated Series. Danilo Castro of WeGotThisCovered.com reminds the world that the internet is well aware of his absence, and while he hasn't appeared yet, this might be a deliberate choice.
Spider-Man? Where? Where?
Could it be that the animated series Spidey will finally make his debut in Beyond the Spider-Verse? We don't know, but there is no doubt about it, we love this theory. The Spider-Verse in and of itself was not only inspired by the last two episodes of the animated series, but it's one of the most beloved iterations of the character. There's no doubt that fans would be ecstatic to see the 90s animated arachnid make it to the Spider-Verse saga, and as far as we're concerned, he absolutely deserves it. Staying on the trend of popular characters returning, we have have even more in this next entry, because there's also some very reasonable predictions that the Sinister Six will return. In the final act of Across the Spider-Verse, Miles ends up stranded in the universe of Earth 42. Because the spider that bit him was actually from here, this universe had no Spider-Man, and as a result, New York was in absolute chaos. Part of the chaos in question included 6 company names in the background, as pointed out by denofgeek.com. They reference Electro, Vulture, Sandman, Scorpion, Doc Ock, and Rhino. While these could easily just be a fun Easter egg for the audience, they might also be legitimate foreshadowing for the upcoming film's villains. Yet again, we have to say, we love this theory. The Spider-Verse saga's portrayals of classic Spider-Man villains have been phenomenal so far, and to add several new ones to the mix would be a fantastic choice. Scorpion and Vulture did have iterations present in the films, but didn't get a lot of screen time. And as for Doc Ock, she was a major antagonist in Into the Spider-Verse, but was absent from Across the Spider-Verse. We never saw anything of her after being hit with a truck near the Super Collider. So could it be that she ended up on Earth 42 and formed a Sinister Six of her own? We hope so, but regardless, this may just be our favorite theory of them all. Okay, let's get into the villains we know for sure will be in the next movie, or at least a major anti-hero. This is the Inheritor Miguel theory. In an article on Looper.com, the author points out a deep-cut reference that may just end up tying into the Spider-Verse movies. For those unfamiliar with what exactly an Inheritor is, they're predators who feed on totems, that is, beings who connect to the animal and human kingdoms. This naturally includes spider people, and given Miguel's antagonistic role and his attempt to downright bite Vulture at one point, we wouldn't be too surprised if Miguel turned out to be an inheritor, or perhaps working with them, since he once visited a universe where he himself was dead. It's certainly possible. That said, we don't like this theory. Sure, some fans might enjoy a deep-cut reference like this, but for Spider-Man 2099 to not be who we thought he was at all would be rather frustrating. We won't say we hate it, because we can at least see some potential in it, but in our opinion, there are better ways to flesh out O'Hara's character. For the grand finale of our list, we're going to talk about a theory that could go 2 different ways, and perhaps the most talked about facet of the movie. This is the question of Prowler Miles, hero or villain. Across the Spider-Verse ends on a cliffhanger, and quite an intense one. Miles is trapped on Earth 42 and is faced with this universe's version of the Prowler, who just so happens to also be the universe's version of himself. This has naturally led fans to speculate what role he'll play in Beyond the Spider-Verse. These speculations vary widely, but the most notable are obviously the prospect of him getting a redemption arc, being mentored by Miles to become a proper hero, or him being a full-fledged villain. We'll go through each of these paths individually. First of all, we love the redemption arc prediction. From the way Miles speaks and the fact that there's no Spider-Man in Earth 42's universe, we can assume that Uncle Aaron was his mentor rather than Peter, with Miles' character arc clearly building up to him realizing how much responsibility comes with being Spider-Man. What better way to illustrate this than by having him help his misguided alternate universe self find a better path in life? But while this may be controversial, we also have to say that we like the villain prediction. When there's no hero to step up, the world falls into chaos. While it's possible that Miles, and perhaps other spider people, could be a good influence on Prowler Miles, it's also entirely possible that due to the lack of any superheroes in this world, he's not super interested, seeing his own path as perfectly reasonable. We don't like it as much as the redemption arc route, but still, this one could be pretty sick. One thing is for sure, both would be in tune with Miles' assertion that he's going to go his own way. We believe in you, Miles, all 2 of you.
After being introduced in Captain America: Civil War, Peter Parker, also known as Spider-Man, has been a popular character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. With 2 solo movies and 3 Avengers movies under his belt, Tom Holland's Spider-Man is back in Spider-Man: No Way Home. With so many characters to talk about in this movie, which ones are good and which are evil? Before we get started, a couple of notes. Firstly, massive spoilers for this movie. If you haven't already been spoiled, don't spoil yourself with this video. Secondly, we may be referring to certain characters by their actor's name. You'll see why when we get into them. Finally, we're going to mostly talk about events from No Way Home, but we may speak about events from other movies if necessary. With those warnings out of the way, we get started by talking about the good. Earning our gold medal of good is May Parker. May is the legal guardian of Peter and his aunt, and is commonly referred to as Aunt May because of this. May is an all-around good person since the beginning of the movie. She gives Peter the advice not to answer any questions without a lawyer, hires a highly respected lawyer to protect Peter, and helps run the feast center to help and feed people in need. She is the one who initially convinces Peter to try and cure the villains instead of sending them back to their deaths. This makes it even sadder when she is killed by one of the said villains, giving Peter the great responsibility speech, inspiring him for the rest of the movie. The silver medal of good goes to Spider-Man from Earth 26283, portrayed by Tobey Maguire. This version of Peter Parker appears midway through the movie, having been pulled to Earth 199999 through Doctor Strange's spell. He soon meets Ned and MJ as well as another Peter, and this leads him to helping our main Peter. He helps Peter 1 deal with the grief of Aunt May's death by explaining his own story of Uncle Ben's death. It turns out he had also been thinking of a cure for Osborn since their duel long ago. He tries to be as good as possible and even stops Peter 1 from killing Green Goblin despite how dangerous he was. He is only slightly better than Peter 1 in this movie, and honestly, all three of them are on pretty even ground. Speaking of Peter Parker / Spider-Man, he earns the Bronze Medal of Good. Tom Holland's version of Peter has gone through a lot in this movie after being framed by Mysterio. Not only is his identity revealed to the world, but he is also slandered repeatedly, even by staff at his school. This causes him to seek out Doctor Strange so he can create a spell to make people forget his identity. Yes, he does cause the multiverse villains to appear, but he also tries to cure them so they wouldn't die, showing how good of a person he is. However, he falls below Tobey's version of Peter simply because he did try to kill Green Goblin in revenge. He is stopped by Tobey's version, and he does give up his entire life to save the universe by erasing Peter Parker from everyone's memories. If it wasn't for the fact he tries to kill Goblin, he might rank higher than the previous Spider-Man. Very tentatively ranking next is Spider-Man from Earth 120703, who is portrayed by Andrew Garfield. This version of Peter fought against the Lizard and Electro in his own universe and was pulled into the MCU through Doctor Strange's spell. He does help cure the villains and helps Peter deal with the grief of May's death, which are both very good deeds. The reason he ranks below the other Peters is simply that he reveals that after failing to save Gwen, he stopped pulling his punches, implying that he may have killed plenty of criminals during his time as a hero. He does redeem himself in the movie by saving MJ in a very similar situation as Gwen, however, he is slightly worse than the other Spider-Men. The next character on our list is the guy in the chair, Ned Leeds. Ned is Peter's best friend and has been since Spider-Man Homecoming. He has always been a generally good kid. In this movie, he is willing to help Peter in his quest to save the villains, showing he has a good heart. He is also shown to be quite competent even with Strange's sling ring and helpful in curing the villains. However, Ned is not a superhero and can be quite dull or egotistical at times, such as when he is tricked into revealing too much about Peter.
Oh, that's cool.
He's not a bad guy though, so of course, he still ranks here in the good area. In a similar spot on the list, Michelle Jones Watson is up next. MJ is Peter's girlfriend and a pretty smart person in general. She is shown to really care about Peter, willing to stop the spell at any moment. She helps Peter in the quest to cure the villains and tries everything she can to help him deal with the grief of May's death. She's a fun character and is shown to really love Peter, which is part of the reason that Peter goes through with the spell to make everyone forget him. MJ is one of our favorite characters, and honestly, she only ranks this low out of necessity. Rounding out the good section of our list is Matt Murdock. Matt doesn't appear in the movie very long, but he was the lawyer hired to protect Peter and explained that the charges probably wouldn't stick. He also tells Happy to get a lawyer and stops Peter from getting hit by a brick thanks to his intense reflexes. Matt does nothing but good in this movie, and it is of course great to see Charlie Cox back in his Netflix role. With the good section of the list wrapped up, we move down to the gray area of our list. Starting off our gray section of the list is Norman Osborn. Now, let us explain our decision here. We are considering Norman Osborn and Green Goblin as two separate characters. In both this movie and the original Raimi movies, they're considered two separate entities in one body. Norman doesn't appear very long, but tries his best to cure himself and the other villains, being something of a scientist himself. He's still only in the gray because we can't fully tear him from the Goblin's actions, and a theory has arrived that his actions are just Green Goblin pretending to be Osborn. The next character to land in the gray area is Wong. Wong is another character who appears very little in the movie, mostly just towards the end of Act 1. We find out that he is now the Sorcerer Supreme and has to deal with those issues. He is the one who tells Doctor Strange not to perform the spell, but doesn't actively try to stop it. He was also not in New York for most of the movie, so he can't help. He only ranks here because he doesn't have enough screen time to rank anywhere else. Sliding into the next spot on our list is Harold Happy Hogan. Happy has a much smaller role in this movie compared to the previous movies, but he's still just as helpful. He lets May and Peter stay at his condo and tells Peter to run when the police have him cornered. Happy also has the Stark Fabricator that both helps create the cure for the villains and also carries the arc reactor that powers Electro up severely. Happy ranks here similarly to Wong because he just doesn't appear for very long outside of some jokes. Another character with very little screen time ranks next, being Eddie Brock / Venom. Brock appears in the mid-credit scene where he is disastrously drunk trying to take in the history of the MCU. He does want to go talk to Peter, but is then sent back to his universe while Venom wants to skinny dip. He doesn't get to pay his bill and may or may not want to attack Peter if the Let There Be Carnage mid-credit scene is anything to mention. He does also drop a piece of his symbiote in this universe, which does not bode well, and yes, in earlier versions of the script he was supposed to fight Spider-Man, but that's not what we got, so we can't rank him any lower. Ranking a bit low is Doctor Strange, who is next on our list. Stephen Strange was the Sorcerer Supreme prior to being dusted by Thanos and is generally a good guy. He cast the initial spell to make people forget that Peter Parker was Spider-Man and does get quite angry at Peter changing the spell. Throughout the movie, he does what he thinks is right, which is mostly sending the villains back to their deaths instead of reforming them. He also initially doesn't want to cast the spell to erase everyone's memory of Peter, and is even shown to be quite sad when he does it. The reason he ranks so low is that he does want to send each of the villains to their death and does give off some evil vibes at times. However, since he thought he was doing what he thought was right and he does end up letting Peter finish saving the day, he won't rank lower. Class bully Flash Thompson is next on our list. Flash is only really important in the first part of the movie where he is first in disbelief at Spider-Man's identity. He immediately writes a fictitious tell-all book about being Spider-Man's best friend. He uses Spider-Man's true identity to try and become famous and doesn't tell Peter where to find the MIT Vice Chancellor until they struck a deal. Flash is an egomaniac who thrives off fame, and honestly, he ranks this low because he doesn't really do anything productive. Rounding out the gray area of our list is Albert Cleary. Agent Cleary is the Department of Damage Control agent who interrogates Peter, Ned, MJ, and May during their investigation into Mysterio's death. He uses tricks to get confessions out of Ned and tries to guilt-trip May into telling him stuff. However, he's not doing this out of bitterness or evilness, he's just doing his job, and it looks antagonistic from the way we view the movie. We now move down to the multiversal threats and a true Sinister Six that are populating the bad to evil category of our list. The buffer villain on our list who could easily fit in the gray area is Flint Marko / Sandman. Marko, portrayed by Thomas Hayden Church, comes from the Raimiverse alongside Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man. Much like the other villains and the Spider-Men, Marko was pulled into the universe by Doctor Strange's spell. Much like the original movies, Marko isn't really that bad of a guy and only commits crimes to protect and provide for his daughter. His entire quest in this movie is to get back to his timeline so he can go back to his daughter. Yes, he does escape and helps Electro and the others fight the Spider-Men, but he just wants to go home, which he manages in the end. He is 100% the least evil of the villains in this movie, hence his ranking here. Next on our list is the first truly evil character on this list, John Jonah Jameson. Jameson is a glorified podcaster and an obvious parody of controversial news host Alex Jones. Jameson is the one who provides Mysterio's footage of Peter's identity reveal, so he's partly responsible for that. He also continually attacks Peter's character even after the spell that erases his identity. He even has someone spy on him and try to approach him in person. Jameson doesn't care about anyone but himself even when people are dying. He doesn't rank lower because he's not actively harming people, but he's pretty close. Ranking outside the bottom three is Dr. Otto Octavius, or Dr. Octopus. Otto, portrayed by Alfred Molina, comes from the same universe as Maguire's Spider-Man and faced him in Spider-Man 2. He fights Holland's Parker almost immediately upon arriving, with his tentacles still in control of his brain. It is confirmed in both this movie and Spider-Man 2 that when the tentacles have a red dot, they are in control of Octavius and not the other way around. This is the main reason why he doesn't rank in the bottom three, that and the fact that after he is cured, he manages to help the Peters defeat Electro, showing that he's not that bad of a guy. Grabbing the bronze medal of evil is Max Dillon, also known as Electro. Electro, played by Jamie Foxx, is from the same universe as Andrews Parker, originally being an employee of Oscorp like Connors. He is transported to the MCU before the moment of his death and doesn't waste a moment trying to kill Peter when he arrives. He really enjoys his new body upon arriving and is initially okay with being cured. But then he steals the arc reactor and gets much stronger. He wants to destroy the container that holds the spell so that he can stay in the MCU forever. He does get defeated and has a bit of a heart-to-heart with Andrew's Spider-Man. He is pretty bad, but he only takes 3rd place. Snatching our silver medal of evil is Dr. Kirk Connors, aka the Lizard. Connors, portrayed by Rhys Ifans, comes from the same universe as Garfield's Parker, having dealt with him in his own timeline. Connors used the DNA of a lizard to try and regrow his missing arm, but this caused him to mutate into this giant lizard creature and had to fight against Spider-Man. He was immediately captured by Doctor Strange upon being transported to the MCU and warns Peter of the consequences of trying to cure the villains. He escapes with the other villains and comes back to fight the 3 Peters at the Statue of Liberty. He then tries to kill MJ and Ned and shows very little respect for the lives of anyone else except his own. He is also confirmed to have tried to turn the entire city into lizard people, offering the same to Electro. He doesn't rank lower because his mission started off good, but as always, the road to hell is paved in good intentions. Finally, the gold medal of evil goes to the Green Goblin. Goblin, portrayed by William Dafoe, is the darker half of Norman Osborn and arguably the main villain of the movie. Goblin not only convinces the other villains to escape and not accept the curses that Parker had made, but he also kills Aunt May and tells Peter that it's his fault. He is absolutely insane and does not care about anyone or anything, barely even himself. He stabs Toby's Parker in the back and pretty much tries to convince Peter to kill him. The Green Goblin takes the gold and laps the other villains 100 times because he has no redeeming qualities. He is despicable and evil by every description of the room because he does nothing but kill and destroy, including the box that holds the spell, causing the multiverse to start tearing and Peter to cast the spell that makes everyone forget him.